Hey welders, ready to upgrade your gear and save some serious dough in the process? The Miller Build with Blue savings and rebate program has you covered. Find amazing deals and cashback rebates on a wide range of Miller products, from welders to plasma cutters and everything in between, all backed by our 3-year warranty. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Take advantage of the Miller Build with Blue program now. Visit us online or stop by your nearest Miller distributor today to start saving.
Peter. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Strange Motion Way podcast. I am your host, Tim Strange, along with my co-host,
Carrie Strange.
We have another great guest here tonight. We have Texas traditional hot rod builder. I got to know his work way back on the Ham forum page. I didn't really participate on that. Actually, I got banned from it because somebody posted one of my cars with billet wheels, but I got kicked off of there. But I would check in to see the thread on his fleet line from time to time. He builds very correct, awesome, period correct hot rods. The weird thing to me was he was actually on a build of that guy's TV show that we're not fans of.
We don't talk about that.
That Gas Monkey thing.
Why did you bring it up?
Because I had to say what show. But they let him spearhead a build, and they built probably the best car they ever built on the show, a traditional blown badass 33 Ford fenderless coupe. Most recently, he has ran his 32 Ford Roadster land speed car at Bonneville and got in the 200-mile-an-hour club, as you can see by his red hat. And it is not as easy as you will think it is just to run 200 mile an hour. We will talk about that. Oh, and it was on 4 cylinders and nitro. And he also has one of the coolest hot rod shops I've ever been to. So welcome tonight, Brian Bass.
Hi, guys. How you guys doing?
I'm sucking up a little bit. I got a Brian Bass.
I like that.
I got my Bass Customs t-shirt on.
You are well dressed.
That's right. So we'd like to go back. We got a lot of cool stuff to talk about, as I just mentioned a few of the highlights there. Like, if you've never listened to any of our podcasts, we like to go back and get the beginnings of how you become a hot rodder, if you grew up around it, or who your local influences one to make you a car guy.
Okay. Well, I can kind of start from the beginning then. I grew up in Waco, Texas. I was born there, and I went to a small school right outside of Waco, about 20 miles east of Waco, in a town called Mart, M-A-R-T, which if you're not from Texas, you will never have heard of that. But it is a football town, and football is life there. So,
Varsity Blues.
It's kind of like that. Yeah. I mean, the whole town shuts down Friday night. You go watch the football game, or you play in the football game. I played football for 6 years, which, you probably can't tell by looking at me, but I played football for 6 years, and that was like the whole thing. But when I wasn't at school, my dad, he was a firefighter. He's a retired firefighter. And what he would do in his spare time as a hobby would go hang out with his car friends. A lot of the firemen in Waco had old cars, and most of them had like either muscle cars or early Ford street rods. And there was a big car show in Waco called the Waco Mini Nats, which was in the 70s and 80s, was a big show in Texas. So I grew up going to that show, and that kind of is how I got acclimated to early Ford stuff, hot rods, and knew I liked it from a young age. And then, just going to see all my dad's friends. That was his hobby, was hanging out with those guys and working on his own cars. And he never really had an old Ford hot rod when I was a kid. He had like some trucks and things like that. He had a 58 Ford F100 that my grandfather bought new in my hometown. And he put a 390, and he drove with the Y block for 5-10 years as a daily driver. And then he put a 390 in it to replace the Y block and drove that daily for a while. And I actually went and tracked that truck down about 5-6 years ago and bought it back. So we've got a 3-owner 58 Ford F100. And that's kind of what I grew up riding and driving in. And we go see his buddies. They check out their
that truck I've seen you post on Instagram is the same truck.
The same truck. My grandfather bought that truck brand new. Yeah.
That's very cool.
And it's got like a dip in the bed floor where he used to haul round bales of hay. It was a total farm truck, and we lived in the country. When I say grew up in a small town outside of Waco, I mean, I didn't actually grow up in the town. I grew up in the country. So, when I come home from school, I got to find something to keep myself busy. There was no internet, and cartoons were only last for 30 minutes or so at the time. And then I'd have to go find something to do. So, I would hang out in the garage with my dad. And my grandfather, he lived right down the road from us. And he was always tinkering with something because he was a farmer. My family has, every generation of my family, since they came to America in like 1621, I think it was a farmer until my dad. So
Oh,
my
wow.
grandfather was a farmer and my dad was a fireman. So it went from farmer to fireman to hot rod builder, which I don't know how that happens, but that's how it happened. So anyway, my grandfather,
I grew up farm life too, so yeah,
yeah,
I broke that mold and
yeah.
hot rod builder too. So
I think
how
that,
big was the town you went? Like how much was in your graduating class?
well, there was 43 people in my graduating
Oh, that's
class.
a big school. I had like
Yeah.
32, and you had like 35 or
I
something.
had like 40, I think.
Did you?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
small town
you
kids.
can relate. Yeah, it's definitely small town.
Yeah.
And my grandfather lived down the road from us, and I spent a lot of time there. And he was always tinkering with something and going to garage sales, and there's always something going on to keep me busy. So that's kind of how I grew up. And then the car thing, I always liked cars, but I'd help my dad in the shop, and he was real big on paint and body. That was kind of his specialty when he was working on cars. That he'd buy a car and repaint it and sell it. And so I helped him with a few of those and learned paint and body from a young age and learned to weld, like welding on farm stuff, like welding cattle fences and things like that. So, that's how I kind of learned like the hands-on side of it. And then when I graduated high school, I went to Texas A&M University in College Station right out of high school. I didn't go to junior college. I went straight to a huge university. And so I went from a graduating class of 43 to a chemistry class that had 350 people in it. It was
Yeah.
quite a culture shock for me. And I spent most of the time just partying, drinking, having fun. It was quite a change from growing up in a small town outside of Waco to going down there. And, I did learn a lot. I took drafting. I was an engineering major. And I really liked drafting, so I learned a lot there. And I learned a little bit about engineering, but once I really got going in engineering classes, I realized this is just all math. And I thought I was good at math. I found out I wasn't as good at math as I thought I was. There's so much more. It's so detailed and so involved when you start talking about the engineering principles and disciplines. And yeah, after 2 years of that, I was like, I don't want to do this. This is not what I thought it was. I liked mechanical things, so I went into mechanical engineering, and it just wasn't what I thought it was. And that's just me being naive, thinking that, oh yeah, this is going to translate to what I really want to do, which is work on cars, motorcycles, whatever. And so after 2 years of that, I transferred out of Texas A&M and went back home to Waco to a small community college or technical college called Texas State Technical. And I got I went for a commercial art degree there. And then that led to me working in the sign industry. And I worked in the sign industry for, I don't know, 2-3 years, something like that.
Okay, so let's go back just a little real quick.
Yeah, sure.
As a farm kid from Texas,
Yeah.
what was your first driver car you had?
Well, so the first thing I really drove around, my dad had a 59 F100. It was an F250 actually that we drove around the farm. I drove that for a while. It was a long bid, 4-wheel drive, actually pretty rare truck, 59, 4-wheel drive. I think it was an F250.
Were those back then? Did they come off the assembly line 4-wheel drive, or was that a NAPCO deal?
In 59, that was the first factory 4-wheel drive.
Okay.
So it was a factory Ford 4-wheel drive. So I drove that around the farm, and they sold that. And then they had oddly enough, a Ford Fiesta. I drove around quite a bit. It was just a little tiny little car, I drove that around.
High school buddies had a Fiesta. And I remember we all took off, went 3 hours into the big town of Chicago. That was a big deal going to Chicago. I think we had 5 of us loaded in there to go look at UTI Technical College, like the college day when we were seniors. And, it's a wonder we came back alive after the shenanigans. We were first time little kids going into Chicago, 17-year-old Midwest farm kids. It's like it was a wide awake. Whoa, what's going on here?
It's a big change, yeah. And that thing was like driving a go-kart because it had a stick shift, and I'd do Brodies out on the farm, And then my first actual car that was mine, I had an S10 pickup, like a lot of guys that are into trucks. I started with an S10. So I had a couple of S10s. And then by the time I graduated high school, I'd upgraded to a 92 S10. This was a 95. And what we did was my dad found a rollover, and we took the rollover pickup that rollover on its top, and we cut the top off and replaced the back half of the cab. Me and him did that. And, I painted it myself, and it came out okay. And it was kind of just a little mini truck. It was lowered, had a decent set of wheels on it. I drove that to college back and forth, and I drove that for a couple of years.
A lot of hot rodders started in mini trucks.
Yeah. And I never really considered myself to be into mini trucks, because I always wanted a hot rod when I was driving a truck. I was always looking at people's backyards and, trying to find some kind of old car that I could afford to start with. And probably about 2 years into driving that S10, I had a lady run like sideswipe me in a dually, and it just drug it all the way down the side of the truck, and I was just like done at that point. I was like, I'd already crashed like three cars, so this was like kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, I don't think I should be driving an S10 anymore. So I took the money that the insurance paid, which wasn't much. I think it was like $2,000 or something like that, and I bought a '71 Buick Grand Sport muscle car.
Oh, cool.
And it was pretty cool because it had like the tack on the hood and the wing on the back. It was a pretty well optioned '71 Buick. And my family had always been kind of a Buick family. My uncle had a '65 Scholar convertible that he drove, and I rode in that when I was a kid. So I always kind of liked Buicks. And I drove that for probably another year and a half or so. And then during that time, I took what was left of the money, which wasn't much, and I put it into the '49 Ford Coupe that I have still today. And that was my first hot rod, was a '49 Ford Coupe that,
Okay.
we put a front clip under it, small block Chevy, eventually a 4-speed, and I put, it was in red oxide primer, put flames on it. And that's when I first started going to like car shows and with people that were my age. In the past, it was always my dad's generation that I was going to car shows with and hanging out with.
Yeah.
Nobody in my
How old are you now?
How old am I now?
When
I'm
when you had your shoebox.
Oh, so that was probably 2000. So I was 22, 23 by the time I got it on the road. 99, 2000, right around there. And that car kind of led to me meeting a lot of people in the hot rod scene, because I'd never, I'd been to the Street Rod Nationals a couple times by that point, and I'd been to the show in Waco and shows around Texas, but I'd never been around people my age, except for just a handful of people that I knew through my dad. They're either his friends' sons or things like that.
Yeah.
But then I started going to shows on my own at that point, and I was daily driving that thing at the time too, which was, I was in Waco, I was working at a sign shop, and I was pinstriping and lettering on the side, and I'm driving this Flam 49 Ford Coupe around. It's like they dropped me off another planet into this town. It's like I did not fit with anything around there. But then when I started going to these shows, I think the first one I really started going to was a KKOA show, right just north of Dallas. And I met some of the people in the car clubs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area through that show. And then, a year later, they started having the Lone Star Roundup, and that course kicked off, a whole scene in Texas. And I got to know a lot of people through that.
We've never been to the Roundup. We built a fleet line we were going to drive down, but we ended up selling it right after it was done. And I've always wanted to go to that show.
Yeah, like a lot of shows, it's gone through a lot of different phases. When it first started, it was very small. The first show was in a football stadium on the grass, and it looked just like some of the old '50s shows where you see, some of the old California shows they had on the grass and like football fields or whatever. It was very similar to that, and had a really neat feel.
Yeah, who's the guy? I'm blank on his name. Who's the guy behind that show? Steve
Wertheimer. Yeah, Steve Wertheimer that runs the Continental Club and several other things in Austin. Really good guy.
I want to come visit him because I talked to him at the last Roadster show.
Yeah,
because I've seen of course, his house was in the Riders Journal when one of his cars was featured. Yes. And I'm a huge mid-century modern house.
Oh, dude, his house is awesome.
He's got an incredible house.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. He's got good taste in just about anything, honestly. I mean, he's kind of one of those guys where no matter what it is, it's going to be cool, Yeah,
he had a couple cars built by one of my favorite builders with Gary Howard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Gary Howard was a great guy and super talented and so humble too. You would never know. He would show up at the Lone Star Roundup and he'd built, all these badass custom cars, and he'd show up and have just like a white t-shirt with the sleeves cut off and just look like some guy that, came from a local bar and showed up, over there. He's so quiet and but he had to be just incredibly intelligent to know how to piece all those cars together and, use the pieces and parts he did and make them so subtle. That was what I really appreciated about his stuff, is always it looked so good, but you couldn't really figure out why. And it was because he had all these subtle touches he would do, like change side trim to something a little bit thinner and things like that. But yeah, that guy, he really had his finger on the pulse of what looked good.
Yeah.
So anyway, Lone Star Roundup kicked things off, and then from there on, I started going to more shows. And, like I said, I was 22, 23 at the time, right around there, and met a lot of people. And then there was a lot of party scenes going on then. Things were a lot crazier than they are now. Now I feel like, everyone's kind of settled down. But back then, things were kind of nuts. Burnouts on South Congress during, the Lone Star Roundup, and just craziness. There's a lot of stuff that, I don't even know if I could tell stories about. Some of it was so crazy.
Yeah, we had the podcast that went live yesterday as we're recording this is a good listen. Josh Shaw.
Oh yeah, Josh.
So he told stories I knew some of the stories, and he got kicked out of the Street Rod Nationals, and like when he was early 20s for doing donuts in the mud in the rain.
Yeah.
And then him and his buddies, they did a cackle car during the Hot Rod reunion in Bowling Green, and then
Yeah.
they ended up not just cackling it in the parking lot, they pulled it down the road and did a burnout. 25 years ago and whatever, and it's changed. Now they block off the roads at Bowling Green for all the events because of what they did with that nitro car in the streets. So
yeah, I went to the Hot Rod reunion in Bowling Green probably in 2003 or 4, and I saw those guys there. I didn't know them at the time, and I could tell they were pretty rowdy. I mean, there was a lot of drinking and things. I don't know what was going on, but it was pretty nuts. Yeah,
he's
and I was
calmed
there
down
with my
now.
dad. I was there with my dad, and I was like, I don't think I should really go hang out with them. Hang out with my dad. Yeah. So anyway, that was yeah. Josh is an incredibly talented guy. And
Yeah.
I know he's definitely put in work to get where he's at today.
Yeah. So okay, after the shoebox, what was next in your stable of hot rods or customs?
Well, so I drove the shoebox as a daily for quite a while, and probably around 2003, so about a year or two of having it, probably 2 years into having it on the road, I decided that I didn't want to live in Waco anymore. I needed to branch out, and I moved to a friend's house just north of Dallas, Fort Worth, in a small town called Flower Mound, just south of Denton. And I got a job at Denton at a sign company. I worked there for about a year. And as I was working at the sign company, I built a motorcycle in one of his spare bedrooms, which he was not real happy about. But I built a Triumph, an early unit Triumph, like a 67 mile. I can't remember exactly what it is. But anyway, somewhere in the late 60s unit Triumph. And I took that to like I think it was the second or third Lone Star Roundup. And it got some decent attention. It was in Dice magazine. And some people noticed it, and I ended up selling it to Jim Jard, who's a famous hot rod guy from here in Texas. He owns a bunch of cool cars, and I used that money. Probably, I don't know, a few months later, I bought a TIG welder. And to back up a little bit, though, before I bought the TIG welder, before I finished that bike, I had gone to California because let me back up. So before I bought the welder, I took the motorcycle to Lone Star Roundup. I met Jimmy White of Circle City Hot Rods at the Lone Star Roundup when I brought my Triumph out.
He's a really cool dude.
Yeah, Jimmy is, there's not many people I like more than Jimmy. He's a great guy. And I met Jimmy at the Lone Star Roundup, and I just finished this Triumph. I painted it myself. I painted it in a garage in my friend's house. And he saw the bike, and he's like, I need someone to paint this roadster pickup I'm building to sell. Do you think you want to come out and paint it? I was like, I guess so. I wasn't really sure if I should do that or not because, I had bills like everybody else. And I was working at the sign shop, and then I got fired from the sign shop like right after that. So I was like, hey, Jimmy, it looks like I don't really have anything to do. I think I'll come out and paint that roaster pickup. So I went out there and I spent about a little over a month out in California in Jimmy's shop. And that was like a life-changing experience for me because, in growing up, I always saw people with hot rod shops. I thought that was unattainable. Like, I didn't think you could have your own shop. You thought you had to either be born into it or just be rich to begin with to have a hot rod shop. I didn't think you could actually run a hot rod shop just as a young guy, starting from nothing. But going out there and seeing how Jimmy did it, and it's really just hard work. That's, he worked hard every day. Of course, he had fun doing it, but seeing what he did on his day to day, learning what equipment he had and needed, and just seeing what it took to run a hot rod shop. Once I got back from there, it was August of whatever year, I think 2004. I got back and I found a couple of friends that were moving into a shop in Dallas. And so it was a 3,800 square foot building in Deep Ellum, which is kind of like the party area of Dallas. And they just leased it. They were looking for somebody else to split it with them. And I was like, well, I guess this is my chance. So I moved into that shop with those two guys, and we split the shop 3 ways. And it stayed that way for about a year. And after I sold that bike to Jim, I bought a TIG welder, and that's why I kind of started doing this on my own. Like I built my Model A coupe next, to go back to your question. And I'd been collecting parts for it. I was talking about looking at people's backyards and in the country, trying to find something I can build. Well, one of my dad's.
Was that this car?
No, that's a different car, but I'll get to that one too. But one of my dad's friends that was also a fireman, he had a deer lease out in the middle of nowhere. And he said, there's an old Ford out in that deer lease. You can go look at it. If you want it, you can just have it. I went and looked at it. It was a 29 Model A coupe, and it was just shot with all kinds of holes. Like it had, I think, 157 holes in it. I think.
Jeez.
Yeah. And so my dad looked at it, was like, there's not enough here to build a car out of. I was like, well, I don't have any money. And he said we could have this thing. So I think I could start with this, give me a place to start. So that's what we did. We drug it back to my mom and dad's house. And it sat there for a couple years until I figured out my life and what I was doing, which I still don't know if I figured out. But
Same here.
Yeah. So I drugged that to my house in Waco, and I had it kind of mocked up, had a Buick Nailhead mocked up in it that I traded some work for. Like I said, I was pinstriping and lettering. So a lot of the parts and pieces I got, I did trading, pinstriping and lettering and things like that. And then when I moved to the shop in Dallas in 2004, I went and gathered all that stuff up and brought it up there with me. And I was able to actually finally have space to mock it up and begin working on it. So it took about a year and a half to finally get enough money and pieces. And I found a Chrysler Hemi for it. And I was able to buy it and did a bunch of work like the first year just to try to make ends meet, and put a little bit of money I had went into buying parts and pieces for the Model A. And that's the Model A I still have now. It's a 1929 Model A coupe with a Hemi. I've driven it. I drove it to Washington State in 2010. I just drove it to Oklahoma to the Gathering at the Rock a week ago. Did a 12-hour round trip in it. And this turned out to be a pretty good car, but that's the first real early Ford hot rod I built was my Model A coupe.
And it's bare metal too, never been painted.
It's in bare metal, yeah. And I always planned to paint it, but it's just like, it's the thing when you build cars for other people, the time to build your own stuff is always so short.
Yeah.
And the time I do have, I always end up building another project, like starting on something else. So, and it's so hard to take a running car apart. As you know, once you get it running and driving on the road, it's so hard to take it all the way completely apart to paint it. So it's just never happened.
Yeah.
And it looks pretty good the way it is. And the metalwork on it's not really to the quality I can do today, because I did most of it. I started doing the metalwork in 2005, 2006, and got it on the road in 2006. And then 2010, I did tear it down enough to kind of make it a little nicer and more refined. And that's when I drove it, cross country, is right after that. So, it still looks now like it did in 2010. There's really no changes to it since then. But that was the first early Ford hot rod I built. And that led to me getting some customer work, because prior to that, I only worked on motorcycles for other people. I did some fab work on some choppers and some stuff that's been in magazines. Like most people probably haven't seen it unless you were following like Dice Magazine or Street Chopper or things like that back in the mid 2000s to 2010, 12, right around there. There was 3 or 4 bikes, and I had a really good friend, Tim O'Keefe, that he kind of kept me busy doing some of that stuff. And he did a lot of it himself, but like fab work, if he needed something welded, I'd weld it. If he needed to make something fit, I'd make it fit. And then I painted a few of the bikes for him too. But prior to me having that Model A on the road where people could see it, nobody was bringing me cars to work on. Like, that's the part I always had trouble with. It's like, I think I can do this stuff, but how do I get people to bring projects to me to pay me to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I finally realized that what I needed to do was build a car that people could see. And even though it wasn't like a really nice car, everything that I'd done, like as far as fab work wise, was done like to my best of my ability at the time. So people could look at the motor mounts, for example, and say, oh, this guy, this car doesn't look finished, but this looks good. And that led to me getting my first big project, which was a 49 Chevy Fleetline for a guy up in the Panhandle. And that's what a lot of people found out about me from, is that 49 Fleetline, because I'd post about it on the Ham, and I was pretty active on the Ham at the time, the Jalopy Journal's message board. And I became a member of the message board like in 99 or 2000, something like that, when I was still going to college. And I really didn't post for the first couple of years, because it was like pretty unruly. Like you get people would just treat you very rudely,
Yeah.
They had the anonymous side of being on the other side of the keyboard, where there was no face to put with it, so you could get away with just about anything. And that didn't really bother me so much, but I knew that I didn't know enough to really carry on a conversation even on the internet about some of those details of things that I wanted to know about. So I spent a lot of that time just reading and learning, and then I've like all these magazines and stuff behind me. That's really where the bulk of my education came from. As I took it to heart that I needed to read and learn as much as I could for the first few years.
See, Carrie, magazines are good. I'm a huge magazine collector.
Oh.
My wife gets tired. She's luckily, I have gotten like 10 boxes out of the house in the last
I'm
month.
appreciative of it.
Finally
It's not that
putting
I don't
bookshelves
like
up.
magazines. It's just when they're all in a bunch of tubs,
Yeah.
and like now
Just take
you're
a space.
realizing you have multiples, And I knew that was the case.
Well, I've got
So-
collections of stuff, so you get extras with. So if you need any Rod and
Yeah.
Custom little pages, I have like 4 copies of all the Rod and Custom little pages and some of Car Crafts and like 50s, 60s, 70s hot rods. I probably have almost 4 copies of every issue.
Yeah.
After
that's-
I kept the best ones.
But
That's
the other
basically what
problem
I
with
had
it
too.
Yeah.
is we have, and when we moved to Tennessee, his father and I refused to move the magazines because we
Yep.
about threw our back out because they're so heavy. But he will know what magazine is in what tub and
Oh, yeah.
where it's at.
When I want to look at something.
But he can't find the ketchup in the refrefrigerator.
It's true. It's
Yeah,
true.
yeah, I can relate to that.
That's
I'm
the
very
problem
similar.
I have with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've carried these magazines with me like 3 or 4 or 5 different moves, and I had a pickup bed full last time I moved magazines. Like it literally took up the entire bed of a pickup just to
Dude,
move
I
magazines.
just bought a Hot Rod magazine collection with most of them in binders. Over 400 issues. I already had them, but these were already organized and in the binders.
That's nice.
I need more binders.
Yeah.
I had a buddy pick them up in Milwaukee and brought them to me when he was on vacation. I only paid $200 for all of them because there was
Seems like a
so
bargain to
much
me.
that you can't ship them. Nobody has room for that many if you don't have a big shop or something.
Yeah, right.
But if you need the one issue from 1955, it's going to cost you $20 at a swap meet.
Yeah.
But all of them, you got to take all of them or none of them. So I took all of them.
What you're saying is you're actually saving money by buying these in bulk.
Yes. Say that again for my wife to hear. Saving money.
Yeah.
But I
saving
have
money.
actually said out loud to her in the spring, the Nashville swap meet, I think I'm going to sell some magazines.
And I'm
Yeah.
fine with that as long as you can find the ketchup in the refrigerator.
Yeah,
That's
no
the
guarantees.
problem.
So if you're missing any copies of anything before I go to the swap, let me know. So
I've pretty much stopped buying magazines finally. I realized that I finally have more than I can even keep up with. So,
Wait, how
but
old
you
are
know, that is if you're starting out and you want to know how they did it back then, that's the best way to, the internet's great, but the internet is not permanent. That's the crazy thing about it, is you would think that stuff on the internet would be there forever, and it is not.
And it's not always
This stuff-
accurate because sometimes it is
Yeah.
altered.
Yeah,
Yes.
now with the AI shit,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, so this stuff is permanent. You can go find it. Maybe the picture quality isn't as good as what you can see on your phone or on your computer, but
Yeah.
it's there and you can read about it and learn. So that's how I learned a lot of stuff. And then, from there it became a hands-on thing. And I was good with my hands because I could do sign work and things like that. And I learned to weld at an early age and learned to paint. So, I was able to translate that into building cars, and building motorcycles too was very good for me too, because it's so detail oriented. And I'm more of I was kind of already a detail oriented guy, but doing signs and then doing motorcycles, that made me very detail oriented. And I don't know if I mentioned this part, but I had no money at this time. Like I was scraping by. I moved in the shop with 3 guys and I could barely make rent every month. I lived in the shop for the first year and I was eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to survive. It was rough. But when I finally got that car on the road and people could see it, I started actually getting phone calls and work and things like that. And it was all because I'd self-promoted. That's one thing that I'd learned pretty early, is that if you're going to do this and you don't have a place to start, you need to be able to do something to show people and self-promote. And then that's how you get out there and people learn about you. And it goes from there. And so that got me my first real job. And I knew that the guy that owned it, his friends were in the Texas Panhandle. I'd become friends with them through the car shows they've been going to. And they kind of pushed him to send it to me because they could see that I was learning, that I was probably going to be good. I mean, they didn't know at the time, but they thought, yeah, this guy has potential to be good. And so, I'd never chopped another car except my Model A when I chopped that 49 Fleet Line. And then it's kind of became like the blueprint for how a lot of them are chopped now.
Fleet Line is a lot harder to chop than a Model A.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, I kind of looked at it and scratched my head for a while and figured out this is the best place to cut it. And it came out really good. And that car was pretty far along when I stopped working on it. And I only stopped working on it because the guy that owned it said he just was tired of it. He decided to move on to something else, like it was taking too long or whatever. But I was working on it like every day for over a year. And it's just working by yourself, things take longer sometimes. And, and I was still learning the business side of it and things like that too. So, it was hard to let go of it at the stage where it wasn't done yet. But I knew that's, wasn't my choice. I had to do what I had to do. And then from there, I'd already had more work. So I was like, well, I mean, this sucks that I don't get to finish it, but I've got this to work on over here. So I'll start working on that. And then I think in that old shop, I built maybe a dozen early Ford based hot rods back to back to back after that, and did, piecemeal work here and there too, some sheet metal work, things like that. But when I was out at Jimmy White's, I watched him TIG weld, and I never even attempted to TIG weld when I was out there. I never even picked up a TIG welder and tried it until I bought one. And so I knew that from watching him that was like one of the key elements to being able to run a professional shop, is being able to TIG weld very well. If you can do a really nice TIG weld, it'll take you a lot of places. So I learned to TIG weld after I bought my welder. And I had a good friend here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area named Bob Wilson. He's the guy he's basically the inventor of the reproduction Lincoln backing plate for early Ford brakes. And I befriended him early on, probably in my early 20s when I moved up here, because he lived in Flower Mound also, where I was living at the time. And so I learned a lot from him. He kind of gave me some basics on how to weld, and then just took it from there. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got started. Was I built my own Model A, then I got the fleet line in, started building that. People saw that, and then it kind of snowballed after that. And next thing you know, I'm up to my ears in work, and I didn't really know how it happened. It seemed like it was overnight, even though it took about a year and a half, 2 years for it to really start hitting full steam.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, I worked in that shop that shop was in Deep Elm. I worked in there for, let me think, almost 15 years. I was in that shop, and the building was built in 1936, and there was supposedly a bomb shelter, or no, it was a bomb factory. Like, they made munitions. It was a munitions factory for World War II. That was what it was built for. And then after that, I don't know what it was, but now it's a high-rise apartment building. It's totally gone. It's not even there anymore.
Yeah.
And I moved out just like right at the right time. I found this place I'm in now, and was able to move out, and it was just, the timing was perfect, because now it's gone.
So your shop you're in, I've been there.
Yeah.
When was that shop built? Because it's like, I don't want to give away where you're at, because I like to be hidden too, but you're kind of hidden because you're kind of grandfathered in a residential-ish type of place.
Exactly.
And you can't see because the fencing and everything. How old is that building? Because it's built, to me, it looks like a carriage house, like somebody kept their horses in there back in the day.
Well, so the area I'm in, I'll tell you the basics about it. It's near White Rock Lake, which is the city lake here in Dallas, and it's popular to like jog around, ride your bikes around, things like that. It's very popular for outdoor activities, and I'm real close to that. And this whole neighborhood I'm in here was built as kind of like the weekend house for the well-to-do people in Dallas. They would come out here and spend time around the lake. And this house was built in 1941 or 42. And I think that this building I'm in was probably here before the house. I'm not sure about that, but I think it probably was. And it was a barn, and it was basically a 3,000 square foot barn back then. And it got grandfathered in so that they could turn it into a workshop. And the person I bought it from, they really didn't do anything with it. But the guy that converted it to an actual shop, he was building humidors for cigars in here. So it was a woodworking shop, and that's what he was building, is humidors. And he's apparently some famous woodworker. He's had stuff like I heard a story about him the other day. It said that he actually so he was building something for, I think it was Neiman Marcus or some high-end retailer. And the Emperor of Japan saw whatever it was he was building and said, "I want one of those." And he flew this guy over to Japan and had him build him one. It's some crazy story, but the guy must have had money to convert it into a shop, because it's got 3-phase power, and it's in a residential neighborhood, which is very unusual. And I just got lucky that we found it when we did, and I was at the point where I had to move out of the old shop because I knew it was going to get torn down anytime, and B, I had enough money to put the down payment on it, and C, it already had this building here, and I was just able to finish it out. Like, it wasn't totally finished out like it is now, but it all the pieces kind of fell into place. But there is a rumor, and I almost hate to say this because it's still a rumor. It's unsubstantiated right now, but there's a rumor in the neighborhood, and I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it's a fact. I'm gonna say it anyway. I don't know if it's a fact, but supposedly this building that I'm in right now was Carroll Shelby's chicken ranch that he had in the 50s. Because Carroll Shelby, when he was racing, there was one part of his life where he was raising chickens. And if you watch the documentary, they talk about having a chicken ranch. Supposedly that was this building that I'm in right now. And I have not figured out how to confirm that yet. They say I have to go back to like old telephone records or something like that, or deeds or something, but there's nothing on the internet that goes back that far. So I have to go like literally look at like microfiche at a library or something to confirm it. But there's been like 2 or 3 different people have told me the same thing, and they didn't like talk to each other. So there may be something to that. I don't know.
I got a really cool Carroll Shelby story to interrupt your story.
Sure, go ahead.
And it's
That's
got to do with farming. So, I ran into Carroll Shelby when he was alive at SEMA and PRI shows and stuff like that, and met him, got his autograph, all that stuff. Well, I'm at one of the years we built, I think the first year we built a car for Ford for SEMA. They gave us a new vehicle. So we get invited to the Ford party. It's in the SEMA show at night, and it's all these, well, there's Brizio, we see the hot rod guys, but it's all the upper crust people in suits and everything. And they have the real Beach Boys playing. That's how legit this party was.
Not a Beach Boys
not a cover band. It's the real Beach Boys playing. My first concert ever. So I'm walking through there, and this blonde girl comes up and says, "Tim, what are you doing?" I go, "Jenny, what are you doing?" This was a girl that showed 4-H cattle. I was a 4-H kid, showed pigs and cattle. Okay. And I go, "What are you doing here?" She goes, "Well, I heard you were into hot rods and stuff. So, I was hoping maybe I'd see you. I didn't know you'd be at the Ford party." I go, "What are you doing here?" She goes, "Let me go get my boss. He will love the story that we used to show cattle together." Here she comes back bringing Carroll Shelby. So then we talked farming and everything. She was in charge of his children's foundation. There was years when they would sell cars at Barrett Jackson. She would be up there on stage on TV behind him, and worked there until he passed away, and worked there a couple of years after. So yeah, I got to talk farming with Carroll Shelby. He goes, "I was a chicken farmer." "Yeah, I know you was a chicken farmer." So that was a crazy small town into here we go to Carroll Shelby talking about showing cattle at the SEMA show, why the Beach Boys are playing. You can't make that crap.
Yeah, that's that'd be hard to fabricate that story.
Yeah, right. I'm not that smart. I'm not that smart to fabricate that story. But yeah, that's pretty cool if that's what it was.
Carroll Shelby still has a son here in Dallas. He runs a bank somewhere in central Dallas. And I guess I could ask him, but I think I really need to go delve into the library and figure out if it's true or not, because that would be pretty cool to building hot rods out of Carroll Shelby's chicken ranch.
It would be, yeah.
But anyway, so that's again unsubstantiated, but there's possibility that that's true. But yeah, we just got lucky when we found this place, and it I was worried moving because I'd been in kind of like a public facing location for 15 years, and I was worried that moving to a shop in a residential neighborhood with no sign out front, no hints that there's even a shop back here, that was going to be a problem. But by that point, I'd made enough of a name for myself where people knew how to find me. If they needed to find me, they could. So it's worked out.
I'm in a town, an old dealership, but she won't even let me paint my building. It looks abandoned. The guys at the welding store call my shop the Bat Cave. There's no sign. The doors never open. I lock the doors. I always say, if people aren't smart enough to figure out how to email me off my website, they're not smart enough for me to build a car for them.
Yeah.
And she makes me keep my doors closed, because if some local hot rodder would walk in, "What'd you do today?" "Oh, I talked to Bubba all day about race cars." So.
Yeah. I used to have that at the old shop. Yeah. And I don't really miss that.
I hate it when Tim goes into a show and goes early, and when we came and bothered you that day.
Yeah.
I feel horrible.
I always ask. If they say, "Oh, I'm busy building something," I don't. I find somebody else to bother.
Yeah, if I know someone's coming, it's not a problem. I don't mind. And I do miss a little bit of that from the old shop, but I don't miss it on the whole, because it did slow me down quite a bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can just focus. I don't really answer the phone much during the day. I just work.
Yeah.
And other than having kids that I have to take care of after working hours from time to time, do go to football games, volleyball games, kid related stuff. That. Other than that, I'm out here working pretty much. So
while you mentioned your kids, how old are your kids?
So my kids are, let me think, I don't want to get this wrong, 11, and my son will be 8 this year. So 11 and almost 8.
Are they what, boy and a girl?
Yeah, girl's the oldest, boy's the youngest. And, they both have grown up around hot rods. So it's kind of like they just take it for granted that there's old cars here. It's like no big deal to them. But then when their friends come over here, they're like, "Oh my God." They're all kind of shocked that this is back here. There's a race car and hot rods and motorcycles.
Your dad's cool. No, he's not. He's just my dad. He's weird.
Yeah, they don't go as far as saying I'm cool, because I'm really not that cool, but they are pretty excited to see all this stuff in here. And you can see it in their eyes, especially my son's friends that are 7, 8 years old. They really get a kick out of it, because it's like walking into a shop with life-size Hot Wheels.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do either of them show any interest?
Yeah, my son, he really likes to use the corner notcher. He'll go over there and cut stuff out on the corner notcher. and then he's learned how to sand the edges to make them where they're not sharp. And they like doing little things like that. My daughter, she could really care less about, she likes to draw things like that. So maybe that's kind of related. But as far as anything really car related, she's not really into it. She's more of a girly girl.
Cool.
So do you have a plan for their first cars?
Not really.
You'll want like a pink Miata or something, then, won't she?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. We need something like big because it's Dallas and traffic's terrible. So
Yeah.
we need like a Humvee or something really big, or one of those otters that has the sides are like this, like just bounce off.
Yeah.
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 But anyway, I don't know where I was on my life story here, but I think
Now, you pretty much just moved into the shop.
Yep.
yeah. So let me back up a little bit because prior to moving into this shop, in 2016, I'd been in my old shop for over 10 years at that point. It was pretty steadily working the whole time. And I was at a spot where I was like, I like what I'm doing right now, but I feel like I'm missing something. And right at that same moment, I found out that Aaron Kaufman had left the show you didn't want to talk about. And I just picked up the phone and called Richard. And I was like, hey, I heard that Aaron left. He's like, yeah. I was like, he's like, do you want to come over and talk about it? I was like, I guess so. So that's really all it took. I just picked up the phone and called Richard. And from there, it kind of evolved into me being a guest builder and building the 34 5-window coupe. And I do agree with you. That was the best car they ever built. There's no doubt.
I can say that because I had two friends that worked there. They were on my TV show before they ended up there. Mike Coy came with Mitch Henderson, and then Tony Cano.
Yeah.
Has a shop. I tried seeing him, but I didn't. He was busy when I just came down for the Good Guys show. Tony was one of the guys that I didn't know ahead of time because most of these people we had to work fast and no drama and everything. And Tony filled out the online form and I got on and checked some stuff out and I was like, oh, okay. And he absolutely killed it. I had him back another time because he come from a small shop. He's like, some of them guys, even the volunteers, I mean, they were all volunteers. You had to tell them what to do next. And Tony, since he worked by himself, he's like, what do we do? What do we accomplish in the day? I was like, this. And he was one of the best volunteers I had. He just seriously was. And then he ended up on there for a season and Mike Coy he was on there for quite a while.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Mike and Tony both were on there when I was on there.
Yeah.
And they're both friends of mine. And Mike still to this day, I talk to him from time to time.
He's a lot of fun. He's a lot of fun.
Mike's a nut.
Yeah.
And one thing you don't want to wrestle Mike though. Mike knows like some kind of crazy jujitsu or something, and he'll choke you out if you let him. Don't wrestle Mike Coy. He's only about this tall, but don't wrestle Mike Coy.
I'm 53 years old. I'm past my wrestling days. Yeah. So he gets mad and be like, okay, you want to go have a milkshake? I don't really care.
He and I got along from like the first moment we met for some reason. I guess because we're kind of like a little bit opposites. Like I'm more quiet and reserved, and he's more crazy. So we kind of fit together real well. And he was always my favorite guy to work with, even though I felt like he was trying to screw me over sometimes with some of the time frames and things like that he needed to paint. But
that's just they got to have the built-in fake.
Yeah, no, I know.
That's just part of it.
I know, but that whole thing, it just kind of developed. I didn't know what it was going to be when I first did it. I
don't remember what year was that when you did that.
That was 2017. And at the very beginning of 17 is when I first started talking with Richard and the production company. And I learned a lot about TV, more than I ever wanted to know about how TV shows were made in that span of time. And I was lucky that it was an existing show that was doing well, like really well at the time, and they wanted to keep it going. So they needed someone that could come in, and the guys that were working there were great. There's a good fabricator, several good painters. Everyone there had skills to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There was no fake building. It was all, we actually did have to build the stuff, and there was no crew coming in at night finishing it. And I personally, when I did the 34, I stayed till 7, 8 o'clock every night. I worked on weekends. I had to do a lot to get it done because it was in my wheelhouse, and those guys knew how to do the basics, but they didn't know the style that I was trying to achieve. Like I was outside of their comfort zone. So I had to do a lot of that just to kind of make it come together and gel as a cohesive design of a car. And doing all that with the production crew watching on Richard's budget, which he did loosen the purse strings a little bit to do that build, but he still always complaining about money, and he got
was that did you mean to say Richard Rollins carries a
Yes.
purse?
Well,
That's
it
just
matches his bracelets. Yes.
yeah,
And a scarf.
and a scarf.
Yeah, and a scarf. Yeah. But I'd known Richard for over 10 years at the time.
No,
And
I met him the first time at Detroit Autorama. It was right after he did that the rat rod that he did the gumball rally.
yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
met him all around that same time. So I guess I'd known him probably
he was in
15,
the
16
basement
years.
with his big toter home. My buddy
Yeah.
Dave Neal bought a T-shirt because he had the cool logo and all that. And
Right.
I've got a lot of stories because uh, they were looking for the next Jesse James type of
Yeah.
person, but in the car world. And
Right.
before I was at the Power Block, Spike paid, it was actually my same producer, to go to Texas and film a pilot with Richard.
Yeah.
And the Power Block wasn't drama and crazy. It was more slower and how to until we did my show. It was basically a knockoff of Overhaul, we built cars in 4 weeks. And they did it, turned it into Spike, and Spike didn't pick it up for whatever reason. I don't know. But
Yeah, I knew about that story. I don't know exactly how he got it to happen, but I know he ended up working with this production company that did American Chopper.
Mhm.
He also did American Hot Rod with Boyd. Same production.
A lot of these car shows, hot rod guys, we work on cars all day long. So the guy that builds houses all day long, he doesn't go home and watch home improvement shows. We want to watch something else. But whether or not these shows, like that show had huge ratings, and I try to look at everything positive. If there was some kid, we've dealt with Richard at events. She's had to deal with him, so just not my favorite person in the industry. But that show, if some kid turned on the TV show and sat in front of that TV and has never heard about cars, fabricating, painting, performance, and that was their interest, man, more power, put more of those shows on, because we need more blood. I mean, they had, you go everywhere. It was like OCC shirts and West Coast Choppers. You see Gas Monkey shirts, and good for him, man. It opened a lot of eyes for a lot of people because there were so many people that watched that show.
Yeah, well, what really made it work was that Richard and Aaron kind of had a comedy duo set up to where there was like a Laurel and Hardy or something like that, or Abbott and Costello, where they really played off each other really well. And they were looking for someone else to do that, and they tested a bunch of different people. I was there when they were testing people with them, and it just like nobody really gelled. And I had a background with them, so we kind of got along, and that was really enough to where they said, okay, we can make this work. And after they brought me in, I built that car. They're like, okay, we need to work. We need to do a deal with you. So I ended up doing another season and a half, basically, after that. And it just fell apart after that because Richard was, he was hard for them to get along with, which I'm sure you can imagine. He was making a lot of money at the time, so he finally decided, I don't need this. And then he went through a divorce route. So a lot of things happened right around the same time, and it all fell apart. And I'd already bought this place.
It's stressful when you're in charge of that too. I'll give you props for that. But I had to do that and organize all the volunteers, organize all the parts, all that stuff. And man, it's just something you can't do for year after year after year. It aged me considerably for the 2 years that I did it. Yeah,
me too. Whenever I stopped doing it, it didn't end very well for me. Because it just kind of fell apart. And I had PTSD after it for like, a month or so, like I would wake up like, oh my God, I have to go weld this,
Yeah.
It was kind of rough, but I learned a lot. I mean, I knew that I was already pretty good at project management, but I never had to do just that. And I had to do just that for a little while doing that show. And I realized, I actually am pretty good at this. Like I can figure out what part needs to be here when to get this done on schedule. Mm-hmm. And they liked that, but there was still a whole lot of almost like sabotaging going on to where it didn't really seem like things were going that well. And I don't know if that was just for the show or what, but when I first went in to do the 34, those guys were not stoked about me being there. They had just had Aaron leave. They saw the Discovery Channel bring in this other guy that they didn't really know. I mean, I knew Mike a little bit. I knew a couple of other guys a little, but then, it was rough for the first couple months. And then once they realized they had to deal with me, it was a lot better for a while. But, doing all that, I wasn't sure what, whenever that was happening, I was like, well, maybe I'll be doing this for a while and I won't have to worry about, building customer cars or anything like that anymore. But ultimately, it was just kind of like a sideline along my journey. Like I learned a lot about myself. Like, okay, I can build cars fast if I need to, but do I really want to do that, or do I want to focus more on details? Do I want to be in charge of other people and be the boss? Because I was at a point where I could bring somebody in to work with me and have an employee, It's like, nah, I really don't like that either. I really just want to work for myself, by myself. And then I bought this place. I was like, I could bring someone else in here, but I kind of like being here by myself. So I've always worked for myself, by myself.
Yeah, doing
And
those
that
TV
is
shows
something,
like that, we're all hustlers, but it made me find yet another gear.
yes,
Doing SEMA thrashes and stuff like that, doing new
yes,
cars for Ford and GM and getting, 2 months to do it. And that was something, but that car's already done and fit and wired and all that. You don't have to fix rust and stuff, but
yeah.
doing those programs, it makes you no wasted movements type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. You learn
Yeah.
to be very efficient.
Yeah.
And that's one thing. If I took anything from doing that, my efficiency level went way up. Like I was, like you said, not making any missteps. Like I didn't redo things. If I had to redo something, it was a very, very odd situation where, something just fell apart at the very last second because I always had a plan B or plan C if I
Mhm.
needed to do it. But, and I learned a lot more about machine work because no one else really in that shop wanted to do machine work or could. So I did almost anything that needed to be machined. I was doing that, and I was doing some design work, and I was having to wear a lot of different hats, which I didn't mind because I did it already on my day to day before I did the show. But
Mhm.
it did make me way more efficient in all those tasks, and that's one thing. If anything, I got that from it. The other thing it did is it brought me into like another set of eyes because I was really only known in the traditional hot rod world in a very small scale, and I already had a following like on social media and stuff when I got the show, but it brought me into other people's living rooms and they could see, oh, this guy is a hot rodder.
Mhm.
So people that didn't normally see hot rods or pay any attention to them, they said, oh, that guy's the hot rod guy.
Yeah.
And so that did help me some too, I think.
And people that have never done TV, they don't understand this, but it's not all bunnies and rainbows that doing TV brings to your life. It
No,
brings some bad stuff, some bad people,
yes,
some shadiness, fake
yes,
friends, all that.
yes,
But it also opens a lot of doors. I do race
it does.
announcing now. I've got some great supporters and, sponsors at the shop that help me and equipment. And I mean, you can't pay for the connections that doing TV for a couple years for me did and opened the doors. I mean, I don't regret doing it. I had a lot of fun. I'm actually talking to him about they're maybe going to bring back like some of the old people to do a build together. And I was like, I would
Yeah,
totally be down for that and, be a
yeah,
guest. I don't really want to
yeah,
do it full time again, but I would do a guest appearance thing.
yeah.
So,
Well, like you said, it is very stressful when you're under the gun because the production company has a timeline they want things done in, and sometimes it's not realistic. And a
yeah.
lot of that is Richard's fault because he would give them this idea that it could be done in a certain amount of time. And he's not a car builder, so he does not know how long things take. And he had
Wait, wait,
had
wait.
the,
Say that one more time for the people in the back.
he is not a car builder. He does not know how long things take.
Mhm.
So he had a pretty good idea from his experience of working with Aaron and, having the show and all that. But when he went and sold Discovery Channel what he wanted to do for the show, part of it was that he was going to do these things fast. He wasn't going to take a long time to do these builds. And when he first started out, that was sort of reasonable because they were doing these quick flips. And then by the time I got on there, they're doing these way more elaborate things that were taking way longer. But you had more people working on them, so it kind of helped. But still, some of the timelines were unrealistic,
Yeah.
and it's just what it is. And I kind of got thrust right in the middle of that. And fortunately, I have kind of like the I don't give up, can do attitude where I will stay and work on weekends if I have to, or I'll work into the middle of the night because I will always work for myself. And if something didn't get done, it was my fault. So I took that to heart when I went in there, and I look up and everybody else is leaving at 5. I'm like, what's going on? And then by the end of it, I was like, I was leaving at 5 too. I was like, if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. It's not realistic. So, but once that all went away and I went back to doing my own thing, I took about a month or two off after that because I'd saved up some money and then set up my shop. I'd already bought this place, and it all happened right about the same time where I bought this place and was able to set it up. So, and I learned a lot, like from going from my old messy, dilapidated shop to a nice television, air conditioned, well lit shop that I kind of was able to take those two and mix them together to make my own shop. And it's set up to where it's very efficient too, because, like you said, you learn not to make a lot of extra steps. And that's the way this place is set up. So when I'm working in here, I'm getting things done a lot faster, and that's nice that I have that now.
So let's talk about some of your personal cars. You got some cars in there. It's got a little bit of history and things. You got what? Last time I was there,
Yeah.
there's a Willys in there, and there's a really
Yeah.
cool 32
Yeah,
roadster in there.
so the 41 Willys I actually bought on the television show in like 2012 or 13. And the only reason I bought it is because it was the only Willys coupe that I'd ever had the opportunity to buy and had the ability to get the money to pay for it. So it's like, this is just, I can't pass this up. So I knew I couldn't build it right away. And it's still sitting here. But I bought it because I wanted to build this car. I wanted to be the guy that built this car. And it may take me 10, 15 years to build it, but I want to be the guy to build this car. So I bought it. And I finally found out the history behind it. It was raced in Minnesota by a guy named Larry Shipshock, which some of the Minnesota guys know that name. He raced a Anglia or Thames or something after this. And he only ran this Willys for maybe a year, one season or so. And it had a 394 or 324 olds with 6.2s, a 37 LaSalle transmission, and he ran it with no rear fenders. And he put an early Ford front end on it, which is kind of like the distinguishing factor of that car. I've never seen another 41 Willys coupe that's got an early Ford front end, but it's got like a 40 Ford front axle. And it's in pretty good shape for a Minnesota car. It's surprisingly rot free. And that I want to start building that car, but it's probably about third on the list right now of my own personal projects. But I do want to build it, and it's not going anywhere until I actually can build it. I've already got the engine built for it. I built a 392 Hemi for it. And I've got a lot of the parts. It's just a matter of the time and the space to do it. And then sitting right next to that, I have a car that I chased almost my entire life. It's a 1932 Ford Roadster, and I first saw it when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. One of my family friends that we used to hang out with and go to swap meets and car shows together, his dad bought it in 1980, and it sat in his garage from 1980 until 2017 when I bought it. And it's got some local Texas history. It actually, as far as I know, it's the only 32 Roadster that raced out of Waco, my hometown. And it ran at the NHRA Nationals in 57 and 58. And in 57, it was runner up in the B Street Roadster class to a famous car called the Rolling Stone, which has been restored.
Oh, wow.
That car sold at Barrett Jackson like 10 years ago for like almost $400,000.
Wow.
The other car, the Rolling Stone. So this doesn't have anything like that value, but it's still cool that it was runner up to that car.
Yeah.
And so those two are sitting right next to each other. Those are the only two personal projects that I have sitting in the shop right now. And then I have that 58 Ford pickup that my grandfather bought new and my dad drove as a daily driver when I was a kid. And I do have one other project that I would call more like a shop project because I plan on building and selling it. That I've gotten a lot of work done over the last year and a half, just in off time. It's a 32 5-window. And it's going to be real traditional hot rod, highboy, no fenders, chopped, 324 olds, 37 LaSalle transmission, quick change, kind of like a late 50s, early 60s style hot rod. And the frame for it's basically done. The motor's done. I've just got to get a spot to assemble it. So fortunately, I have a decent sized shop, but it's not quite big enough for all these projects. So
yeah, they're never big enough. I work by myself too, and I have just almost 8,000 square feet, and it is full.
Yeah. This shop is only 3,000, and I use pretty much every inch of it. And I tried to learn from my last shop and not put so much stuff in here, but it's still to the point now it's starting to fill up where I don't have, it's not quite as, when you saw it, it was still spick and span and you could eat off the floors. It's not like that anymore, but it's still pretty nice, but not like it was when I first moved in because, after working in here for, I guess, 5 years now, it's hard to keep it perfect.
Yeah.
But so those are my personal projects that are sitting around. And
let's talk about the red 32 that you drive a lot. I've seen recently you had a little engine problems with it.
Yeah.
You drive your cars a lot.
Yeah, I have two cars.
You're going to drive your hot rods. You better be handy because you're going to have to work on them.
Exactly. I have two hot rods that I drive pretty regularly. The 29 Model A coupe that I talked about earlier, and then I have a 32 Ford Roadster that it came out of California, and it's got some history too. I think it's turned into a hot rod around 46 or 47 because when I took it apart after I got to add LA newspaper in the door from 47, but it didn't stay in Southern California. It went up to Northern California.
Why? They did that a lot. I mean, I've tore cars apart. That was like the cheap sound deadener for the doors and stuff.
Exactly.
But yeah, you're always like, oh, I found this. My dad's got a Tri-5 guy, and it's like, oh, I found a 19 whatever, newspaper in the door.
It's like being a detective. You have to, if you want to learn about the history of these things, you have to do a little detective work and kind of figure out what clues you have to figure out what the car was in a previous life. And so I know this car was built into a hot rod probably around 46 or 47. and then it went from Southern California to Northern California. It was channeled somewhere along the way over the frame. And the oldest picture I have of it right now is from 1970 something. I can't remember exactly the year, but it was a full fendered channeled 32 Roadster, had a Dodge Red Ram Hemi in it. And I've had people from the Bay Area look at the pictures and say, I don't really remember that car. So it was never like a famous hot rod or anything like that. It was just some guy's 32 Roadster. But I did talk to the guy that bought it when it had the Dodge Hemi in it, and he took it and made it more of an 80s street rod, put a small block Chevy in it. It was painted candy red, same candy red that's on it still. And he put like gold highlights on the body lines, and I got rid of that when I got it. But when I got it, it was just a body, and it came from a tattoo artist named Flip Hayes in California, who's always got some hot rod, some really bitchin' hot rod project going on. Everything he touches is cool. And he found it on, I think, Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, something, and bought it. And he said the frame was just junk. So he took the frame apart and threw it away. And he kept like the front axle and some of the parts. But I ended up trading a 32 Ford chassis, like a rolling chassis with engine and everything, basically ready to go, all original frame, flathead motor for the body. But when I got the body, it was a cowl and quarter panels and doors. And when you unlatch the doors, it came apart in two pieces. So like the cowl was one piece and the quarter panels, cowl and doors were one piece, quarter panels were another piece. So I had to put a whole floor in it, and I put it on a stock 32 frame. And I did all that like in a really short period of time in 2015 because I knew that I'd wanted to go to the Race of Gentlemen, and there was also an event called the Hot Rod Hill Climb at the same time. It was like, I want to do both those things, and to do both those things, you have to have a flathead. It has to have the right look, and so I built it just like it would be built in like 52. So it has a 59A flathead, 39 transmission, banjo rear, all the the original Ford parts to make it look the part. And then I took it to the Race of Gentlemen, I think 3 or 4 times. I did the New Jersey event like twice. I did Pismo once. I may have done New Jersey 3 times, but anyway, that was the main reason I put it together. I put it together like over 11 weeks, like really fast.
That's one event we've never been to. My buddy Rob Ida races there often and took a Jag there this year. And
it's one of those things, like from the outside looking in, it seems like almost like a Civil War reenactment. It doesn't seem like, these guys are really car guys, but when you're there and you're lined up next to somebody, it's a race. These guys are serious and it's fun. That's the thing I like the most about it. It's on it's in a really cool town in New Jersey that it's usually in the off season, so there's not a lot of tourists there. Everybody there is there for this spectacle, and Mel is like a circus, performer. He's the guy that puts it on, and it's like he's like P.T. Barnum of hot rods. He knows how to get this thing together and pull it off somehow. But I really enjoyed doing the Race of Gentlemen. I wanted to do it this year because I built another car after that to do just the Race of Gentlemen and the hill climb. It's a Model T Roadster, a little track T I built an aluminum nose, aluminum belly pan, put a supercharged flathead in it. And I only got to run it one time so far in 2019. And I wanted to do it this year, but my Bonneville racing got in the way of that. So, if you get a chance to do Race of Gentlemen, as a spectator, it's cool, but it's so much cooler if you have a car there to drive. You can just borrow somebody's car and drive it. Somebody will let you.
Do they still do the one on the West Coast? They did that for a while, or they
only did that one time in 2016. Okay. Yeah, and I took my Roadster to that, and it was like hard to even describe because it rained all day. You think, oh, that sounds terrible, but it was still a lot of fun just for the fact that all the California guys came out, and that's the thing that you have to think about too when you think about these events. One of them is on the East Coast in New Jersey, like on the ocean, and the other one is on the Pacific Ocean, way across the other side of the country. So a lot of times those two groups of cars don't get together. That's a long way to travel.
Yeah.
So one has a lot of East Coast guys, and Pismo had a lot of West Coast guys. So the car quality of both is pretty good, but we saw some like really bitchin' stuff in California, like the Navarro Roadster. They took it out of a museum and ran it down the beach. Barney Navarro's T Roadster.
Yeah.
I got to run against him and I won. But so there's stuff like that. You don't really. How would you experience that anywhere else? Where can you line up against Barney Navarro's Roadster and run him heads up, side by side, other than like the Race of Gentlemen at Pismo?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of aspects of both those events that I wish you could do it. They could do it more often, but you're dependent on the weather for one thing. You're dependent on the city allowing it to happen, and that was one of the big problems with California. Is what I understand is like the permits to do the California thing were super expensive. So
Yeah.
that's why I haven't done it again.
Yeah. Yeah, she works for a company that runs events all over, and it's always a little bit more difficult when they go to California for stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So,
Okay,
anyway.
so you mentioned before the Bonneville car, so let's get into the Bonneville car.
Yeah. So Bonneville, I first went to Bonneville in 2003. I drove my shoebox 49 Ford shoebox out there with another friend of mine named Rick, and he had a 40 coupe. And we drove from Texas to Bonneville in our hot rods, spent a week out there. And I'd always wanted to go as a kid and never got the opportunity because it was just in Utah and I'm in Texas. And
Mm-hmm.
talking my mom and dad into doing that was not going to happen. And I couldn't afford to do it myself. So it wasn't until 2003 I was able to do it. I drove my hot rod out there. And I knew right from the moment I was there, I was like, this is really cool. Like,
Yeah, we went the one year, it was a rain delay, so we got to go to the museum and stuff like that. And we have a bunch of friends locally that run the Hopes, and they've set records since the early 60s, and multiple records and stuff. And she decided to go last minute. I was going to go hang out for my buddies, and I just figured she was going to go to sit there and say, we ain't doing this.
yeah.
Like the third vehicle went down the salt. She goes, this is cool as hell. We should build a Bonneville car, which we're not with, hopefully we got a couple buddies that we might be able to do some licensing runs someday. But if I had the money, I would probably be building a truck right now to go to Bonneville.
When
It's
we
nothing
build
like
a Bonneville car, everyone's gonna know that we've won the lotto.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Well, yeah, you say that, but if you space it out over a long enough period of time, you can make it happen. That's what I had to do because I'm not rich. I didn't have enough money to build a Bonneville car, and I have one now. But when I went out there
back to eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to make it happen, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, I moved my shop to the same property as my house, so that helped too. But anyway, when I went out there the first time, I realized that I really liked it and I wanted to go back, but I didn't get to go back again until like 2008, I think it was. And right before that, I met a guy in the Dallas-Fort Worth area named Ed Stuck, and he was running a car out there. I met him through a mutual friend, and he was running a car out there, and he'd already set a couple records. And it was a Model A Roadster, a 29 Model A Roadster, a bitchin' black 29 Model A Roadster. And his car has been racing as a Bonneville car since 1958 or something like that, a really long time. And he had just repainted it, and he needed someone to do lettering on it. And our mutual friend said, well, I know a guy that can do lettering and pinstriping. So that's how I met him. I did the lettering on his car. And, we hit it off immediately, because he's a real hardcore car guy. And, I was too. So he's like, why don't you come out and crew on the car for me this year? And I did. And I continued to crew on his car for probably a dozen years after that. No, more like 15. And that's how I learned that you don't have to be super rich to have a Bonneville car. You have to be determined. You have to know the ins and outs. Like, you have to study it. You can't just walk. You can go out there without knowing anything about it, but you're going to waste your time and money, most likely, because there's so many things you got to know to make it happen.
The rule book is within a reach of my bedside, so I can. Oh, I want to,
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff you think you're going to do to go faster, and it's like, oh yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah. So that was really my foot in the door, was crewing on Ed's car, and because it was just happenstance that I met the one guy in our area that ran a blown fuel roadster at Bonneville. Like, there's nobody else around here that runs a blown fuel roadster at Bonneville by him, and he's a cool guy, and we're really good friends to this day. And so I crew on his car.
Bonneville racers are the different breed. When I see people wearing a Bonneville, like a participant something or a hat, I like to go up when that's how I got to know Ron Hope a lot better. As I got to see him at the local cruise-ins, he's wearing 200 mile an hour club shirts and hats, and I think, hey, old man, you buy that at Walmart? You don't want to know how long it took him, because he started racing in the he just recently passed away this year, and it was 3-4 years ago till he finally got in the 200 mile an hour club. He had records, but he's got like a 262 record. Finally got that hat.
Yeah, it is not easy in any way, shape, or form. And my friend Ed, he was already in the 200 mile an hour club. He'd run, I think right when I met him, he had just run 268 miles an hour in his Roadster, which, we're talking a Model A Roadster with a short wheelbase, high boy. You have to be a crazy person basically to do what he was doing in this car.
Like the first time I walked up, and I knew George Poteet for years, right? Got all these over 400. We just lost George this year. And I'm
Yeah.
looking at that. You know, I'd seen the car at SEMA and PRI and stuff. And I go, George,
Yeah.
I thought this was a two-seater. And he goes, two-seater? There ain't room. I go, where do you keep your nuts? And he just started laughing. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I want to go over 400. That sounds
Yeah.
crazy to me.
Yeah.
But so, back to Ed, I crewed on his car and he was running nitro, which I had no experience with nitro whatsoever, except for going to the drag races and knowing that, oh, I like the way that smells. This is badass. But I actually got to be really in close proximity to it and learn how to run it. And the other good thing about crewing on Ed's car is that it introduced me to the network of people that were running roasters out there, running nitro, had experience in it. And I met a guy named Albert Eschenbaugh who lives in Phoenix, and I live in Dallas. So I'd see him at Bonneville once a year. And one year I went out and crewed on Albert's car and helped him. And this guy, just to give you a little background on Albert, he'd been racing nitro since the 1950s. He ran it like his first NHRA Nationals was like 57 or 58, and he drove. And then he ran nitro in a dragster through the Phoenix area and all over for like 10, 15 years after that. So he's been running nitro forever. And his roadster, he set a record in his roadster. And then the next, like 2 months later, he came back to the next event. He had taken one piston out of his roadster's engine. So he had a V8 Chrysler Hemi, took one piston out, made it a 7-cylinder to fit in a different engine class, and went out and set a record almost just as fast with 7 cylinders. And when they went to impound to check it, they're like, well, this is not coming up right. This is too many cubic inches for the class you're saying you're running. And he's like, look again, there's no piston in that hole. So they were multiplying by 8 instead of 7. So anyway, this is the kind of guy we're talking about, a guy that's tried everything under the sun. So I met that guy and we became instant friends, and he's way older than me. And so is Ed. Ed's approaching 80 and Albert's now 82, I think. So, and this was 15 years ago or so. So they were younger men at the time, but anyway, they're still much older than me. But, they could tell we're kind of cut from the same cloth, and they kind of took me under their wings and started letting me learn about roadsters, nitro, Bonneville. And if you're going to build a roadster for Bonneville, I don't know how you do it unless you find someone like that can kind of mentor you and give you like the ins and outs. And that's where I'm really lucky, is that I was able to get some background knowledge on what I need to be looking at, what I need to be doing. And
Which
so
I think some old hot rodders, and they get old and crotchety and crabby, because I'm starting to be that way too. And but I think when you got something like Bonneville Racing, those guys want it to continue. So if they see somebody that actually has the heart, the drive, the passion, they'll take you under their wing like they did to you, because that's what they think is cool.
Yeah, and the nice thing about it is there's not a lot of secrets. I mean, there are some. People will hold some things close to their chest because it's whatever they're using to go fast. But by and large, there's not that many secrets out there. If you want to know something, just go ask. The person will tell you, and most of the time they're truthful about it. I'd say 99% of the time they're telling you the truth to the best of their ability. So that's been good for me to learn all that. And I decided about 5 years after meeting Ed, I was like, I think I want to build a roadster for Bonneville. And I started buying parts for it, and then I had a kid like right at the same time, so that put that on the back burner. And then I just kept buying parts for it over the years. And then COVID hit like in 2020, and I went to Speed Week in 21, and I ran into Albert from Phoenix, and he's like, I'm not going to run my Lakester anymore, because he had run a roadster, then he ran a Lakester, which was basically like a rear engine dragster, but set up for Bonneville, so skinny tires, long wheelbase. And he had been running a 4-cylinder Hemi in his Lakester. He's like, if you want to build your roadster, I'll bring you the 4-cylinder out of my Lakester, and you can put that in there. And I was like, well, that's all I need to hear, because the thing that was really holding me up was a crankshaft is $5,000. A cylinder head a pair of cylinder heads is like $6,000 to $8,000. All these things are very expensive, and that was my biggest hurdle. Like little things like a front axle, wheels, tires, things like that. I had a really good friend. He and I had started buying parts together. He'd buy a part and I'd buy a part, and we kind of went back and forth. And he still partners with me on the car. His name's George DeRuvo. But so we started buying parts, and we collected parts for a good, I guess it was almost 15 years before I finally started building the car. And so around Christmas 2021, I started getting very serious about it. Like I'd done 15 years of research, almost 15 years of crewing on Ed's car. I knew almost to the nut and bolt what I wanted to do and how I wanted to build it. So it went together pretty fast. Like I built the chassis here in the shop. It only took me maybe 2 months to get the chassis done. I built the cage in it. I borrowed Ed's tubing bender to build the cage. And he was coming over once or twice a week, kind of say, okay, this looks good. Maybe you want to think about doing this. Give me some pointers. And I had a roller by, I think, June of 22. So I was really seriously trying to make it to Bonneville Speed Week in 2022. And that would have been like 9 months from the very beginning to running it at Bonneville. And I almost made it, but it got rained out that year. So I kind of said, okay, I'm going to take my time and finish it the right way. And I put a much better paint job on it, thankfully, because I had time to do it then. And I debuted it in 23. And the weather wasn't good in 23. They postponed it like 2 or 3 days for Speed Week, and a lot of people just went home. But I went out and looked at the first few cars running down the course, watched motorcycles go down the course. It's like, these guys are getting down the course. I have to make rookie runs. I have to license up. So I was like, I'm going to stay and do this. And I did. I made 3 passes the first year.
So
and
since
really
you're our first Bonneville racer that's been on our podcast.
Yeah, I should probably explain how this actually works.
Yeah, you get to explain all this for the
almost like
Bonneville guys.
Yep.
You don't just show up there and go 200 mile an hour.
It's a very different type of race. Land speed racing is a very different type of racing because you would think you just take whatever you want out there and race it. It's not like that at all. The rule book, like we were saying, the rule book's like super thick and it's written in blood. You know, this is a sport where you can get hurt. It's not something that, you know, there's nothing keeping you from getting hurt, but your own ability and the tech inspectors that are making sure that what you're doing is safe. So getting through tech inspection alone is a giant hurdle at Bonneville because it's very stringent. This rule book, they take it very seriously. You can't your cage has to be a certain diameter of tubing. You have to have the right number of tubes. You have to have gussets in certain spots. And for each type of car, there's a set of rules. So if you have, say, a Honda Civic, that's got one way you have to build it. If you have a Roadster, it's a totally another way of building it. So safety is of utmost importance out there, and they take it very seriously. So you can't just.
I had a buddy that built a Dodge Dakota truck, which he just wrecked this year too.
Yeah, Brick and I are friends. Yeah,
me and Brick's good buddies too. And I think he took his to El Mirage kind of tacked up, kind of like, am I on the right path here? And I think he took it back again, and before finishing it again, it took him 15 years to build it, and unfortunately he rolled it at El Mirage, but he ran really good and walked away. I mean, that's what all the safety stuff's there for.
He was going pretty fast when he crashed too. I mean,
I think it was like he thought like 178. He lost it and
you think about,
and it rolled. He blacked out. It rolled like 7 times.
Yeah, you think about crashing your normal car that you drive as a daily driver at 170 miles an hour, you would probably die.
Oh yeah,
there's no way around it. You don't survive that unless you have a proper cage, proper safety equipment, helmet, Hans device, all that stuff, and all that. You have to have all that to race at Bonneville. It's not like you just take your car out there and race it. They will not let you do that.
Yeah. So
my car is built specifically for land speed racing. You couldn't do anything else with it because one thing that a lot of people don't know is that the cars have to be very heavy, especially if you don't have a way to provide downforce with wings or aerodynamic devices. I run in a class that it's basically considered the hot rod class. So there's no wings, no splitters, nothing like that. All the traction comes from weight of the car and whatever downforce you can get in the rake that you build into it. Like my car is a little bit of front to back rake or back to front rake. And there's a little downforce there, but all the rest of the downforce comes from weight. So my car with the 4-cylinder weighs almost 4,000 pounds, which is twice what a typical Model A would weigh. And so that's important. And the way that a lot of people explain that to me with the weight is that it's kind of like the principle of a freight train. A freight train, it may top out at 70 miles an hour, and it may take a long time to get to that 70 miles an hour. But once it's accelerating, the weight doesn't matter anymore. It's moving. And Bonneville is very similar. With one caveat to that is that if you're trying to set a record, you may need that whole 5 miles, and you have to leave the push truck as soon as possible and really push it. So there is a certain point where weight becomes your enemy, even though you have to have it. At that point, you have to make more horsepower, and that's what we did.
So the rookie courses explain. You go over there first, and you have all these licensing levels, and your first one, you have to be able to show that you can control it and pay attention to how fast you're going. Your first sign off is how fast is that one?
So you can go up to 125 with just a regular driver's license. 125 to 150 is your rookie run typically, and they want you to stick between there. If you go 151, you're going to get reprimanded and probably have to do it again. But you also don't just go out there and race. You have to go through a rookie orientation, which they explain all these things to you, like where to turn off, because you turn off a certain way if your car is okay. You turn off another way if something's wrong, like you're on fire, you're hurt, you had a heart attack.
And then they
whatever.
time you on a bailout. You have to be able to get out of your car
Yes.
at a
Yeah,
safe time.
that's part of tech inspection. You have to be able to you have to demonstrate you can get out of the car in a reasonable amount of time, which is usually around a minute or so. It varies depending on the type of car, but I built my car where I knew I could get out of it pretty fast. So I can get out of my car in about 30 seconds if it's on fire. And that's fully suited up with a Dash 20 SF5 fire suit, Hans device, helmet, the funny car boots and gloves, everything. So, you have to make sure that you can get out of your car. And a lot of people don't think about that when they're building their car, and they'll get the car totally built, and then they sit in with all their stuff on. They can't move. They can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big no-no out there. So you have to be able to think far enough ahead that, okay, if this is on fire, I need to be able to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty important. But yeah, back to what you're saying, there's a short course and a long course. If you're running as a rookie, you almost always have to run on the short course, and that's a 3-mile timed course. So you have the first mile to accelerate, then they time you at the 2-mile and the 3-mile, and that's it. Well, they time you the 2-mile, 2.25, and the 3-mile. And you can go up to 150 for that first run, and you have to show that you can pull your parachute. You have to get all the way off the course. And my first run, I didn't get all the way off the course, and they yelled at me about that. And the other problem I had was that my fuel shut off. We had changed our starting procedure right before I made the first run, and I didn't turn the fuel shut off all the time. And it was still running when I pulled off, and they were not happy about that. So there's the first run I made. I was like, what did I do? I mean, is this really a good idea? Because the course was super bumpy because it rained like right before the event. Nothing, you have this idea about things are going to go when you make your first pass at Bonneville. You think, oh, it's going to be awesome. Everything's going to go just right. Nothing ever really goes the way you planned it. So almost everything that could go wrong went wrong the first time. But the second run I made the next day, everything went bitching. I went 150 or something like that, 151, and pulled off the course the right way, and everything went great. I strapped in the car in the right spot, was able to drive, able to see. And then the third run I made, it was fine, but we just didn't go any faster because we changed the tune-up and screwed it up. So that's the other thing is like, even if everything lines up, you might screw up the tune-up and still not go as fast as you thought you did. But I was glad that I was able to run it those first 3 times because I got my rookie run out of the way, got the rookie jitters out of the way, which I was really nervous.
I can't imagine.
Because, I built this car myself in this shop. Every nut and bolt of this thing was me. And I was like, what did I forget? You're thinking about that the whole time. Am I going to spin this car and kill myself? There's lots of things you think about, especially in a roadster, because there's nothing really to protect you other than the roll cage. You're sitting right out in the open.
I think the motorcycle people are insane. I love to watch them, but it's insane.
Yeah. If you're going over 250 on a motorcycle, that's pretty scary, I'd say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anything below that, your leathers are probably going to protect you pretty well. But man, they can only do so much over a certain speed.
Mm-hmm.
But so that was the first year of Bonneville. Made it through tech inspection. Car did pretty good. The driver not so good, but I learned a lot. And then I did this all with the help of I think there was about 10 of us the first year that came out to help me. And the crazy thing is I built this car and I didn't have any idea who was going to crew on it for me. I knew I needed help because you can't run a nitro car by yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
And I fortunately had another friend from Arizona that came out and spent the whole week, another friend from here in Texas that came out and spent the whole week, and a few other guys that showed up and stayed as much as they could, some of the whole week, some couldn't. But, now it's funny because, I had no real experience running nitro except for helping Ed and helping Albert. And then these guys had never been around nitro at all. And now we're all like seasoned pros. Like we're all nitro junkies. We can run a nitro car. We know what to do. And so that's kind of cool because we've now got a cohesive group. And that started last year. But this year's when it really came into effect. Speed Week only happens once a year. So the car sat from Speed Week last year to Speed Week this year, which is a full year.
So back up, that first year, was there any fire?
No. First year, I just made 3 passes. We didn't go faster than 151 miles an hour. But, nobody really went more than 200 because the course was so bad.
Yeah.
And, I knew the course was bad, but people were telling me this is like the worst I've ever seen it. So that's one thing with Bonneville, too, that's been a real detriment to land speed racing the last 5-6 years is that for 2 to 3 years in a row, it rained out.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, things are not great for Bonneville racing. Like people start to forget about it.
Yeah, I think the year that you ran the rookie, our friends the Hopes, they got to the hotels. They never took their rig out on the salt. They never unloaded their car. They hung out for a few days. They seen your car. They gave you big compliments. So if you know Brian, he doesn't give anybody compliments.
No,
and
he
he goes,
doesn't.
"That's a bad son of a bitch." He says, "That thing is
He's
beautiful."
that old crabby guy
Yeah,
that we
he-
were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
he's one of those old crap. But they're nitro guys too. They don't run nitro at Bonneville. They run the Rat Trap Nostalgia
Yes.
nitro cars. So they're
Right. Yeah, I know those
familiar with
guys.
nitro stuff too. But
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we didn't catch it on fire the first year, but and then, like I said, a year went by. And this year the salt was great. Like it's the best it's been in several years. And I knew that we had a potential to go fast this year. Since I got my rookie run out of the way, a couple licensing runs out of the way, I knew that I'd be able to go out this year, speed we can just license up back to back to back, and then try to go over the record. And the record in our class, I should probably talk about the engine a little bit because the way Bonneville is set up, Bonneville's set up on your engine size, your fuel type, and the type of car you run, and whether or not it's supercharged or turbo blown. So those are the major stipulations. And my car is a roadster. And like I said, the roadster is the hot rod class. There's no aerodynamic aids, no wings, no splitters. It has to look like an old hot rod. So there is a little bit of modernization going on in the roadster class. There's several cars now where the axle is out in front of the grill to give it a longer wheelbase because they think that makes it more stable. I didn't want to do that because I don't like the way it looks. And I know that looks don't really matter at Bonneville. It's all about going fast, but to me, they mattered. I wanted my car to have a certain look, and I built my car as long as I could within the rules because the rules say the body can only be 143 inches long from front to back. And I wanted my axles to fit inside that. So I have a 121-inch wheelbase, 142 and 3/8 long body. So it's almost 143. And then it's really, other than that, it's just a hot rod. It's a roadster body, a real original roadster body, a real 32 grill shell. I built all the aluminum panels myself. I did everything on the car myself, from assembling the engine to building the chassis to building the cage to painting it to lettering it, everything. And the engine that I'm using, I talked about Albert saying that we could use his engine. Well, he brought me a Donovan 417 V8 Hemi block like they would have used in drag racing in the 70s. And he had blanked off one bank of cylinders. So it's only using one bank of cylinders, only 4 cylinders in a row. And he had a crankshaft made by Velasco, a billet steel crankshaft that's 180 degrees. So rather than having
is that the same Velasco that run at Bonneville too?
I don't know that they do. Velasco's made crankshafts forever, since like the 60s. They're really, Henry Velasco, I think, is the guy that still runs it. And they're one of the best crankshaft manufacturers there is. There's them, Bryant, Win something. I can't remember another one. But anyway, there's only like a handful that still make billet crankshafts, and they're one of them. But for the firing order and the crankshaft, he made a 180-degree crank, so the outside 2 pistons go up and down together, and the inside 2 go up and down together. So it's like any other 4-cylinder, and it's just based off a V8 Hemi block. Well, before we ever ran the car, I realized that this block it had a few problems. It had been windowed, like in drag racing, and some of the things about it were not great. And we'd found a billet aluminum rodeck block in the meantime, and that's what I ended up putting in the car. So we took the internal rotating assembly out of the Donovan, put it in the rodeck, and that's what we ran. So we're running it as a 4-cylinder with a V8 Hemi block. It's only 178.58 cubic inches, and the record in the class was 204 miles an hour. And we're talking no supercharger, no blower. The only power adder we have is the fuel. We use nitromethane in it, and that's how we make the horsepower. And to go over the record, I knew we were going to make about 750 horsepower out of 178 cubic inches of 4-cylinder.
Yeah.
And that's, you're talking almost 4 horsepower per cubic inch. That's pretty hard to do with no power adder besides nitro. So anyway, that's the way the class is set up. And it's a roadster, it's nitro, so it's fuel class. It has a F engine. So the engines are in letter designations. There's AA, which is over 500 cubic inches, A, B, C, D, all the way down to F, which is 170. Well, it's 184 is the limit. So we're right under the limit there. And I knew that this year with the salt being good, we had a really good chance of setting the record in that class because Albert and I both thought we had to be making more than 750 horsepower. We think about what a V8 injected nitro V8 makes. We have to be making approximately half of what that makes, and they can make up to 2,000 horsepower. So
when you went the first year with that and ran your 150, was there much that you saw? Oh, I need to change this or change the steering or the shocks, or was there a lot of stuff that you had to change, or was it pretty good out of the box?
The car itself, the only thing I changed on is I added a little more weight, which I don't know if I really needed it, but it made me feel better that it weighed a little more. The main thing I learned was that to drive the car, I was worried that if I put my foot into it, it was going to spin the tires and spin the car because roadsters are known for spinning on the salt.
Mhm.
They hardly ever go straight. They almost always, if you really have a problem, they spin, do a flat spin, then you got to get re-inspected. There's a whole rigmarole involved in that. But I learned that my car, it really liked it best when I just went out and flat footed it off the truck. As soon as I can get wide open throttle, that's what it wanted. And so I learned that on the last pass that I could do that and it didn't spin the tires, didn't spin the car. And so this year when I went out, that was my game plan from the beginning. As soon as I could get off the push truck and go wide open throttle, that's what I did. So every time I drove it this year, I tried to push my foot through the grill shell. Like I pushed it as hard as I could, hold it wide open. And the first few runs I was still licensing up, so I do it on the short course. So I was able to go 175 the first pass. I went like 174.9.
Okay, I want to talk about the mentalness of
Yes.
holding your foot. I mean, people think, oh yeah, I drive fast, or oh yeah, I floored it and I went a quarter mile. I'm drag racing. But
Yes.
how many miles is the long course again for everybody?
Long course is 5 miles wide open. So, it takes me probably 20, 30, maybe 50 yards to get off the push truck.
Mhm.
And I'm going maybe 20 miles an hour when I leave the push truck. From that moment, as soon as I get wide open throttle and not spinning the tires, I'm wide open. So it takes on the record run we made, it took us 1.89 minutes to make a full pass. So I'm holding the throttle wide open for almost 2 minutes for 5 miles. And we're talking,
It's crazy.
this is a half of a V8 on 100% nitromethane. There's no alcohol, there's no methanol in there. We
Mhm.
put 100% nitro in it, which a lot of people think, well, you can't do that. Well, you can. It just, you have to be smart on the tune-up. And that's where I'm fortunate is that I had Albert there who had run this engine combination or a very similar engine combination. A few things were different. So we kind of had a baseline tune-up and we were able to work from there. And that's what it took us the first year and the first few passes of this year to figure out, oh, we have it a little bit too rich. I knew I could feel something like it was stumbling, but I didn't know if it was too lean or too rich. And the computer finally told us that, and the spark plugs finally told us, oh yeah, we're too rich. So by the end of speed week, we leaned it out and we were going fast. Like we were getting close to going 200.
Mhm.
And then we only made, I think, 6 passes at speed week. And the last pass, we had it tuned up really good. I mean, it sounded bitching. Like this thing's cackling. It don't sound like a 4-cylinder. It sounds like a top
Mhm.
fuel car. Out of this little tiny 4-cylinder, it sounds like a top fuel car. And I leave the truck, I put my foot in it, and I'm hauling ass. And then about 3 miles down, I start feeling something. I shift into high gear, and it doesn't go any faster. Like it just kind of noses over. I was like, well, this is no good. So I immediately pulled the fuel shut off, pulled the parachutes, pulled off the course, and when I got stopped, I could see little flames coming out around the fuel injector. I was like, oh, this thing's on fire. This is not good. Well, right as I'm realizing that, there's a guy coming towards the car. I'd already stopped. This course worker guy is coming towards the car with a fire extinguisher. He's like, you're on fire. He's putting it out. So I didn't ever have to pull the fire bottles. He was already trying to put it out. And he's like, you need to get out. So I'm in there fumbling trying to get out because this is the first time I've actually been on fire.
Mhm.
And I was on fire when I was driving it, and I had no idea it was on fire. My car is sealed up so well, which that's one of the big things about the running a roadster, any car at Bonneville, is they want you to have a very good firewall between you and the engine. Like they don't want any fire to get between the engine compartment and you if possible. And fortunately, I did a good job of that because I had no idea I was on fire. There must have been smoke coming out or something where he knew that I was on fire because he came to the fireball as soon as I stopped. So I was going 190 miles an hour on fire, pulled parachutes, came to a stop. He comes over, he puts it out, but then it flared back up again. And then the fire department showed up a couple seconds later and they jerked the hood off of it and put it out. And I have a little door on the front of the car for the starter. They were able to put it out through that door. But that was a pretty harrowing experience because I didn't even know I was on fire, until I stopped. Then I was able to get out, and it didn't hurt the car except for anything that was plastic or rubber from the firewall to the grill shell was burned. I mean, it was unusable. So that basically did us in for the meet. That was our, I think, 5th or 6th pass at Speed Week. We were done. And it was very heartbreaking for me because we were
Speed
so
Week
close
is
to going.
what, usually the second week of August, first week of August?
Yeah, this was the first weekend into the second week of August. Yeah. And so, I knew that we were on track to breaking that record. And Albert he really wanted to set that record because he knew that his engine that he provided had it in it, and he knew that he could tune it to go over 204 miles an hour, and we were close. So when I got it back home, this was, like I said, the second week of August. I took it apart, kind of inventoried what was bad, and started figuring out what I needed to fix it. And then I started ordering parts and made all new oil lines, all new spark plug wires, all new wiring. I did all this over about 2 weeks. And then into the second week, I did a compression test on the engine and then a lead down test and realized this engine, something is wrong because I have one cylinder that does not have as much compression as the other three, and it's leaking down a lot. So I was like, well, I called Albert and said, well, you got to pull the head off. I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. So I pulled the head off. And when I pulled the head off, I was like, my heart kind of sank because the number 2 piston, it had a broken spot about a 1/2 inch wide on the top of the piston next to the intake valve. And I had to machine the pistons for valve clearance. Our cam is so big. We have a giant camshaft in this thing. So I had to machine the pistons, the valve pockets deeper. And when I did, that one piston, I nicked it a little bit with the tool in the mill when I was doing it. And I knew I did it, but I was like, it's no big deal. Well, that's exactly where it burned or broke, right where I nicked it. Well, again, we're trying to go back out to an event called World of Speed. It's run by a different organization called USFRA.
And this is the time that I reach out to Mr. Bass to say, hey, man, would you like to be on our podcast and talk about going to Bonneville? And he's like, hold on. I don't have any spare time because every night I'm working on the car because we're trying to make it back to Bonneville.
That's the truth. I was working round the clock basically trying to make it back. And I work by myself, like I said. So I'm doing all this by myself. I get the piston out and I called Albert and said, I think I'm going to weld this piston. This spare piston, we had one spare piston. It was a little undersized. It didn't look any better than the one I took out, really. So I said, we can't get a piston in time. Arius can't make one in time. So I'm going to weld this piston. What do you think? He's like, well, it'll probably work. So I welded it. I took the TIG welder. I welded it. And then I already had a fixture set up to cut the valve pocket. So machining the pocket again was no big deal. But I had to put a 4-jaw chuck in the lathe to hold it centered. I had to make a tool to cut the ring grooves. Like, it was kind of involved. But by the time I was done, you couldn't even tell I'd welded it. So I was like, well, maybe this will work. Every person I talked to said, you could not weld a piston. This is not going to work. And when I told them I'm running on nitro, like, you're going to make one pass and that's it. You're going to be one and done. You're wasting your time. It's like, well, my friend Bob told me that if you're going to be a welder, you have to trust your own welding. I trust my welding. So I'm going to put it back in there. And if it's one run and done, so be it. We're going to go back and try it. So this was like 3-4 weeks later, we go back out and the car's all back together. Looked pretty good. I burned the paint off the hood when he set it on fire. So I put little flames on it, made it look a lot better. Like little taped out little flames and pinstriped them. Go through tech inspection, no problem. Run it the first day. We waited in a line for and that's the other thing you have to think about Bonneville is you think, you'll go out there, you'll be able to make 2 or 3 passes a day. You'll be able to hot lap it. It ain't like that either when it's busy. We sat in line for 6 hours the first day.
Did we say what caused the fire on the first time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I should back up. So what caused the fire, and I didn't know this was even a thing, but we were on so much fuel pressure that the rubber lines, one of them popped off of the hose bar where they're crimped. So we had crimped rubber fuel injection lines, just like any Hillborn injection would have. And one of the crimps popped loose, and it was spraying fuel around like one of those yard things you put in your yard to spray water, like in the summer. It was spraying fuel around like that inside the engine compartment, and the coil was hot enough that the coil ignited it. And you could see the source of ignition was the coil, so it burned really bad on the coil and really bad on the fuel lines, and we knew those two were related. And before I took it back out, I replaced all the rubber lines with stainless steel hard line, which I should have done in the first place, but nobody told me that. Yes, the lines say on there they're rated to like 500 psi. Well, the barbs aren't really rated, or the crimps aren't really rated to 500 psi unless you have the certain guy crimp them or certain place crimp them. So I should have put stainless hard line from the beginning. I just didn't know. It's one of those things you learn the hard way, I guess. But going back out, I had that fixed. I'd sent the magneto off, had it repaired, put a new coil on it. Everything was fixed, and I ran it here at the shop. I ended up putting a different cylinder head on because I bought a pair of heads. And we would only run one, so I put the brand new head on it. It sounded really good when I put the new head on it, and I knew it was going to be okay after I ran it here at the shop. So we took it back out, went through.
What do your neighbors think when you when you roll that thing out and you test a nitro car in the neighborhood?
You would think they'd come complain, but they never say anything about it. So I just have to assume it's okay. They must. That's just Bass over there. He's running his car. It's not the only loud car I have. It's just the loudest car.
Yeah.
But so. we go out to this other event, and I knew we were close when we were at Speed Week, that we were close to setting the record. Well, we took it off the trailer, the first pass off the trailer after sitting in line for a while. We went 206 on a 204 record, which that qualifies you. And another thing about how Bonneville works is if you go over the record, that doesn't mean you set a record. It's a two-way average. You have to back it up. So every record run is an average of 2 runs. So
And you don't get it back in line. You got to go to impound.
that's right. Yeah,
You
they
do
don't
it
let
the
you
next
put it
day.
right back in line. They don't let you take it to your pits. And that's where we screwed up, is we didn't go into our pits. But well, let me back up a little further. So after this 206-mile-an-hour run, I'd sat in line for 6 hours in my Dash 20 fire suit. I was cooking in there. The car right in front of me spun out and took out 2 of the timers. So they had to fix that. So I'm sitting there for 45 minutes, sweating my ass off. They let me get out of the car, get back in. I run the car, it runs bitching, runs 206 miles an hour. I get down to the end. I pull off. Everything seems great. I get out, and I start seeing a little bit of smoke. I was like, am I ever going to run this car again without catching it on fire? Because this the last run I caught on fire. I'm on fire again, but I'd already gotten out. And this is at 5:30 on a Friday. There's nobody around for miles. No fire truck, no crew, no spectators, nobody. I'm out there by myself. My car is on fire. I don't really know what to do. Pull the fire bottle. It didn't work. There was something wrong with the set screw that goes in. It was gone. It vibrated out. So then I'm trying to put it out my coat. I took my jacket off, tried to put it out with that, but it wasn't helping. Finally, my crew gets there a few minutes later. It's like, I need a Zeus tool. We need to take this hood off. It is on fire. It already burned a chunk of paint this big off the side of the hood. So we got the hood off, and it was just the spark plug wires were on fire, but they were on fire enough to burn the paint. And the main source of fire was that the header almost fell off of it. So I'd put a new header gasket on it, and it wasn't compressed enough. And as soon as it got hot, it loosened up, and the header almost fell off. It's got 9 bolts. It'll only have 1 left.
Oh,
so
wow.
The header is almost falling off of it. So I'm going through all this, figuring it all out. We run over the record. We have to go to impound. I stop on the return road at the pits to tell Albert what had happened. And someone says, you only got 20 minutes to get to impound. You need to go. So I get back in the truck. We're pulling away to go to impound. The guy that runs the event comes over and says, hey, you can be disqualified for stopping in your pits. I was like, we're not in our pits. We're on the return road. So, well, you got the hood off. I don't know what you're doing. It's like, it's a nitro roadster. What am I going to do to it to make it illegal? It can run whatever fuel I want, and it's a roadster. What am I hiding? I can't hide anything on a roadster. He said, well, I still have to go with you to the SCTA and tell them what you stopped in your pits. So we did that. They had a powwow, came back and said, it says here in the rule book, you cannot stop it. You cannot stop. You have to go directly to impound. And I was like, well, that's kind of vague, but whatever. Okay. So I was mad. I mean, this was a lot happening in a short period of time.
Yeah.
I go from being in the car hot as it can be, the car in front of me spinning out, taking out the timing blocks, setting the car on fire again, getting it out of fire, trying to put the fire. Oh, I left out a part. So after we get the hood off and we're out in the middle of nowhere, my buddy gets the fire extinguisher out of the truck. I said, put the fire out with the fire extinguisher. He goes to spray a fire extinguisher. Nothing comes out.
Oh, jeez.
We had to put the fire out with our mouths like blowing out birthday candles. So we finally got it out. We're going to impound. We get stopped by the guy. We go to impound. They won't let us in impound. I'm pretty much over it at this point. I was furious, And then the next morning, we don't have the stuff we need to fix the car. So I had to call my friend in Salt Lake City, and it got parts from him.
So they did let you in impound eventually?
Well, I'll get to that. So
Okay.
no, they wouldn't let us go to impound. We had to go back to the pits and run the car again and try to qualify again.
Okay.
Well, we didn't have enough spark plug wire parts. We had almost enough spark plug wire parts, but not enough. And I called my friend Mike Strasberg, who built the transmission in the car in Salt Lake City. He said, "Yeah, we got some on our funny car or something you can have." So I sent a guy 2 hours away to Salt Lake City to go get parts and come back. And so he finally gets back. Well, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the fire bottle because it didn't go off, and I set it off accidentally. And so our fire extinguisher bottle goes off. I was like, well, that's it. We're done. I don't have a spare fire extinguisher bottle. I walked around every pit in the entire place asking, do you have the same type of fire extinguisher? Nobody had one. And someone said, well, did you try Mike Strasberg? I was like, well, I just sent a guy there, but I'll call him. Well, I call him. He's like, yeah, I think we got the same ones. He sent me pictures. Yeah, that's exactly the same one. So I had to send the guy back again 2 hours to get the fire bottles. And I'm sure he was pretty fed up, but he was a good sport about it. So we get it all back together. We get it running again. Sounds good. The next morning we go out. and we ran it again. It went even faster. It went 212 miles an hour on a 204 record, 213 exit speed. We qualified for the record. We go straight to impound that time. And then, you don't get to run it the same day. We had to service the car, all this stuff. And then we had one day left in the meet. It was only a short meet from Friday till Monday. So Monday morning, they line everybody up and take them all out to try to back up the record. And there was probably, I think, 8 or 10 cars that had qualified. And we were like the second or third car to run. And the one thing that was different is this is early in the morning, and it'd been in the 90s the whole time we were there when we were running the car. Well, it was probably high 60s when we ran the car.
Oh, wow.
And I'd never ran it when it was that cold. And when we started up, we normally just let it run for just a few seconds and we push it off and go. Well, we did try kind of the same thing, and it was cold. When I left the push truck, it's just kind of bogged. It went bleh. And I was like, oh my God, what did we do? But then it just came back to life and took off. And I just did like I always did, and floored it, went foot all the way in it, and it went. I knew when we got to the end that we'd set the record. I have a GPS on the car that has a speedometer, and we went 212 with a 214 exit speed, set the new record at 212.301. Everyone's honking and yelling when they come down. I'm sitting on the car doing this. It was a pretty cool experience, especially after all the trials and tribulations. Because.
Yeah.
To set a record at Bonneville is one thing. To get in the 200-mile-an-hour club is something entirely different, because you can't just go over 200 and get them in the club. You have to set a record over 200, and it has to be an average of 2 runs. And a lot of people, they'll make that first run and never back it up. Some people take 10, 15 years to do it.
See, I've learned a lot about Bonneville with our friends, Hopes, Brian and Ron. Ron was the grandpa. Brian's like my age, and then the son, Michael, runs too.
Yeah. So
they both have 2 cars. They switched. They're both turbo car. Well, one was a Pro Charger. They switched turbos for this year. Anyway, they almost look like a comp dragster with a Model A body. One's a front engine, one's a rear engine.
Yeah.
Brian's is, I forget which one he is. But anyway, his was a little smaller. His dad has a 262-ish record, got the red hat.
Yeah.
Brian has a 232 record in a smaller cubic inch class, has the record for 4 or 5 years, but is not in the 200-mile-an-hour club with a red hat, because that car is proven to go so fast with a different. So to him, he's got to run I forget, a little bit percentage more. He's still got the record, and that's just, I always thought, man, and I still don't understand it, because Jezels with that truck, dude, they put people in the car and get them in the club, and changing cubic inches and all that. I don't understand that, but I guess. I don't know. There's a weird gray area in some of that. Yeah, there's some classes that were easier than others to get a record in, and the record may only be 150 miles an hour in your class, but you have a record. But that doesn't put you in the 200-mile-an-hour club. And your record may, like you just said, there's minimums for some classes where they know that the car should go faster than what the record is. So the 200-mile-an-hour club, which is a separate entity, they set the minimums, and they say, unless you go 240, above that, you're not in the club. And I don't really understand how they come up with that. I guess they have a group of experts that figure out what the car should run and decide that. But my buddy Brick, he built that Dodge Dakota that was a newer mini class, super, turbo power adder, blown. And at that time when he was getting close, it was almost done for the last 3 years. I stayed after SEMA and helped him do stuff on it a time. And at that time, the record I think was 178 in that class, where there was you'd pay attention to everybody and get to meet. And he's like, oh, there's 3 other guys racing it. Well, somebody got in the 200-mile-an-hour club, put it at a little over 200. And, he was on a pace, a couple shakedown runs, and he could have been in contention to get a record and over 200 until, now there's nothing left on that thing that says Dodge Dakota. The cage did its job. And he was very lucky on that. There's so many things that can go wrong. That's the thing, is you can have the best plan, but just one little thing can make it where you have to go home for the week. And that happens to so many people out there. Yeah. I mean, it takes a little bit of luck, and it takes a whole lot of planning, and a little bit, a whole lot of skill, I guess, too.
Yeah. And it's not going back the next weekend. It's
you can't. It's not like a drag car. Oh, before I go to the U.S. Nationals, I can go down to my local drag strip and test it. You can't. Yeah, you can't do that. I'd never driven a car at Bonneville until I drove my own car. Yeah, that's the way I had, because nobody let me drive their car. I would have driven somebody's car if they let me. But that's got to be. You ran a total of how many runs before you got your record? I thought I seen you posted there was 7 runs and 3 of them were on fire. Whatever. Yeah. So my partner Albert, after we caught it on fire the second time, he said,
how many times you run the car now? I was like, 9. He's like, and you've been on fire for 2 of those? I was like, yeah, he's like, that's not a very good record. Yeah. So we ran the car, I think 11 times to set the record.
That's
That's
absolutely
pretty efficient.
Yeah, that's almost unheard of in Bonneville stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing is it's in a roadster class, which roadster classes are notoriously difficult. You know, they've been setting roadster class records out there since the 1940s or 50s, whatever. You know, since like 1949 or 50. So, you know, these records are long standing, established. People took their whole lives sometimes to break them.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not the easiest one to set. But I knew that that's the class I wanted to run in because I like roadsters. That's what I like.
Yeah.
I like hot rods. So I wanted to set my record in a hot rod class. And I wanted to do it on nitro. And the really bonus part of the thing is I got to do with one of my heroes, Albert, which Albert is he's like a walking encyclopedia of nitro. You know, he knows so much about it. And I've been fortunate because he's passed a lot on to me, and I'm still learning. You know, we're done with the 4-cylinder now. We set a record with it. He was upset it didn't go faster because he thought it should go like 220. But, you know, we set the record, so he's happy with that. But we're pulling the 4-cylinder out, and now we're going to run a 300 cubic inch V8 with a blower. And the record in that class is 241 miles an hour, and it's been standing since 1981.
And
so
you run that on nitro also?
It was on nitro also. Yeah, the car that set that record was a car called Gotcha, ran by a guy named Temple. And he ran a iron Chrysler in it with a 671, I think, blower on nitro. And nobody's been able to break it since 1981. That shows you how tough it is.
Yeah.
You know,
what is that other? I mean, there's not a lot of nitro cars that, you know, we don't go every year, but I pay attention, and sometimes I'll listen to the live feed when they're racing to hear, well, that guy didn't do it this year, the slim guy or whatever. He seemed like a real jerk, but I really like the live feed. And was it the 911 car, the black 3334 Roadster?
Yeah, for a time. Yeah, the 911 was the world's fastest roadster for a time. It ran 301.
Oh,
you
wow.
know, the people there's kind of a contention against Bonneville guys about what's a roadster and what isn't. You know, some people will say, well, it's a roadster even though it's got a wheelbase a mile long and a long pointy nose. And to me, that's not. I mean, it's a roadster. Yes, Star's Life is a roadster, but the roadster class are roadsters. They're not long, streamlined, pointy cars. So
yeah, like our friends, the Hopes, I call that, they look like a comp dragster.
Yes,
with the wing on the back, and they got the dragster nose on it. Yeah, it's a fiberglass Model A body,
it's
but
a modified roadster.
Yeah,
a modified roadster is a class, and that's what it is. So they could have the world's fastest modified roadster, but the world's fastest roadster is in the roadster class. And so the 911 had that for quite a while. And just to like, I think in 2021, I believe it was, there was an unblown fuel roadster, roadster ran injected nitro that ran 306 or 7. And that was Doug Robinson's car. And that still right now is the fastest roadster. And that is to kind of put a bow on this. That's our goal for my cars, to have the world's fastest roadster, which means I have to go about 310 in it, an average of 310 someday. And I don't know if we're going to do that right away, but we think that this 300 cubic inch motor will be able to do that, which, we could put it in a different engine class. You can go over, there's really no limit. You can go build as big an engine as you want to, but there's a problem with traction. And we think that the smaller cubic inch engine, it doesn't shock the tires as hard. And the car we think is good for a roadster. There's not a lot you can do to make it slippery, but as far as roadsters go, I built a pretty slippery roadster.
Yeah, when we were kind of got serious there for a little bit and started playing and stuff, I was going to build like an OBS truck.
Yeah.
And with our Royal Purple oil deal, we were going to work with.
There's a class for that. There's a class for everything.
Yeah, an engine play, and the truck classes fuel were new at that time. Thinking, I can build this no. And we were going to have an LS built, and this Lingenfelder, they've been sheet out a block and put this like Lego thing in there, and they could make that any type of cubic inch.
Oh wow!
So we had the class. I forget, we were going to do because it was a soft record, right? On the book that we looked at, and it was going to be less than 300 cubic inches, whatever class that was.
Yeah. And
then they're like, oh, then if you do good in that, we just change that middle, as long as you don't blow the motor up, change that, and then you can put different pistons and sleeves in that.
Interesting.
You go up to the next class, and the marketing guy that we were working with on that isn't there anymore. So
that happens.
Yeah.
Well, and that's interesting too, because a lot of teams will bring multiple engines and try to set records in multiple classes.
Yeah, that's one thing. Poteet's,
Yeah. Yeah.
Streamliner, they did that. They would just change classes. And man, I remember that year we were there. They had small fire and oil. I forget which class, but they changed it around and put an LS in it. And like in 2.5 hours, they were back in line.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if they ran it that year or they fixed the bigger motor, so then they put them up, they pulled it back out of line or something. But 2.5 hours, they changed the motor from a big block to an LS with all the engineering and mounts and the modular wiring, and put that and cleaned up all the oil. In 2.5 hours, they were rolling out of the pits again.
Those guys are on a different level. That's a different level.
Yeah.
The amount of equipment you have to bring, the amount of guys you have to have, that's a big operation.
Yeah.
And it's me and just a few guys when I run my car, and that's the cool thing about Bonneville, really. It really is that you can have a guy like Poteet who has basically unlimited resources.
Yeah. And then two stalls down, you got some guy living that he's sleeping on the curb all weekend in his U-Haul rental truck that don't look like he has showered in a year in his motorcycle. And it's like, and everybody's friendly with everyone. I just think
it's a huge
totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone is so helpful, like when I needed a part, I needed a bolt. The guy next door is like, "Oh, just go dig through my bolt bin. You can take whatever you need." Or, if we needed a fire extinguisher bottle, my friend that built the transmission in Salt Lake says, "Yeah, come get one." So, and they race Bonneville and hold a bunch of records too, so they knew what we were going through. So it's really a really good community. It's very similar to the hot rod community in a lot of ways, because a lot of people, they help each other, and I like that about it. There's a lot of racing where it's very cutthroat, and Bonneville's not like that at all. NSP racing is not like that.
Yeah, you want everybody to be safe and perform well. It seems like you're out there. Yeah. So you told us about what you're going to do. You're going to change the motor, and you talked about a couple of your cars. Is there any other, as we've talked for almost 2 hours now, any other car on your bucket list that you would like to build? Hot rod or another race car? Is there anything else? Or, I mean, you got some pretty cool stuff sitting in the shop in your Bonneville car. You're changing motor sizes, but is there anything else still that you'd like to do?
There is one thing I want to do, and it's totally foreign to what I normally work on, which is early Ford-based hot rods. And I have 2 customer cars in the shop right now. Both are 32 Fords. But for myself, I really want to do some kind of vintage sports car. My friend Luke is building one right now, and it's amazing. He's built a tube chassis for it, put a small block Chevy and I think a 4-speed in it, but it looks like a Ferrari or a Jaguar or something from the 50s.
I'm sure you've seen that bare metal car that Luke DeLay at Marcel's built for himself.
It's that same idea, yeah.
Oh, dude, that thing is just...
I would love to do something like that. And, I have now that I've built the Bonneville car and I did my track tee, I've got enough like aluminum shaping experience where I think I could do it pretty good now. Before I did those 2, I probably don't think I could have done it, but now I think I could. I'm pretty good with the English wheel now, so I think I can do that. But I almost want to do it though more like a GT40 where you have a rear engine, build my own hot rod version of one of those, because I think that could be really cool. Put a 5758 Chrysler Hemi, a 4-speed transmission or transaxle behind that, and then make it really low like a GT40 and just have like 60 style like Halibrands on it, things like that. I'd like to do some kind of sports car, either a front engine sports car like Luke DeLay's or something like a GT40.
So to build that, would you sit in the shop in the middle with candles as sitting on the floor Indian style?
Absolutely.
And say, "Talk to me, spirit of Carol Shelby in the chicken barn."
I'd probably have like some Stevie Nicks on the radio. But that would be cool. And I would really like to build another Bonneville car for somebody that's not me. That's what I was hoping to be, like a build. If you build it, they will come situation, but they haven't come yet. So, I think as the car goes along and proves itself more, maybe that'll happen. But that's such a small niche market that it may never happen. But it could. And if anybody out there is listening to this and wants to get involved in Bonneville, I've got a 4-cylinder engine coming out of my car that'll set another record in the right car. Just have to call me up and get it going.
Yeah, buy a lotto ticket.
Yeah, I'll buy a lotto ticket. Yeah, we were actually doing that, and a couple buddies of trying to get one of my big customers to be a part. Like the cool race names, the Strange Bass Special or something like that. Something like that. And it's funny, these guys that have a lot of money with the big car collections, I still get a kick out of it, because their wives can still tell them no, and they have to listen. And it's like, I just thought it was us poor people that your wife said no because we don't have the money for it. But they still have to listen to their wives when their wife says no, you can't do that.
I thought my wife would be a lot more nervous about me driving my car because she knows what it is, she's been around it. But when I told her, oh
There.
yeah, I caught the fire, I told her, yeah, I caught on fire, but I'm okay. She's like, oh, okay. Just kind of
She didn't
laughed it
go
off.
out.
She didn't go
I don't know
out.
if that was like, she didn't go out with me. The kids were in school and she couldn't. There was like the first week of school, she
Yeah.
couldn't go. So I called her and told her, yeah, I'm fine. The car caught on fire, no big deal. And she's kind of laughed it off. And I don't know if that was like a defense mechanism to like not let it sink in that that could have got heard, but
Reality.
So I think
fine
when
with it
Rick
so
ran
far.
his Dakota first at Bonneville, I think his daughters and his wife was there, but they were not there
Yeah.
when he wrecked it at El Mirage. I know
Yeah, and
that.
if I would have crashed it like brick, that'd probably be a whole different story. But
Yeah.
just catching on fire and I was fine. She didn't seem to be
Yeah.
But
bothered.
like his wreck, not to keep bringing back wrecks, it was so crazy that I heard about it. I reached out to him. He's like, dude, I'm okay. And they tried to put him in the ambulance to take him into town or whatever. And he's like, dude, do I have to go? They're like, no, you have to sign off. And he goes, I really think I'm good. Like he has a bad back. He goes, like my back feels better than it has in 5 years.
Hit
Like,
just the
am
right
I in
spot.
shock? Do I have like a bone sticking out of me? And they're like,
Yeah.
well, okay. And he got up and walked and told his wife, he's like, I'm not go. So like a week at home, his wife says, you need to go get checked out. So he walks in, the doctors, and is like, what are you here? Well, I wrecked my truck. Well, you don't look hurt. Why are you here? Well, my wife says. So then they kind of, showed him some pictures of the truck and how fast he was going. They're like,
Right.
oh my God. So they did all these, making sure nothing on the inside was, he had like 2 bruises on him and they didn't, nothing. Yeah. But
It's
when you walk in, like her, when she wrecked her BMX bike this year, they're like, she couldn't even walk. It was like a few weeks away from each other, her wreck and
His
Rick's.
was a week after mine.
Yeah, and she's got broken ribs and bruised lung and 4 pelvic fractures and can't walk. And same thing, I showed up the video of the wreck and they're like, oh my God, we got to scan you right now. And
we don't heal as well as we get older, I've noticed.
Yeah, that is true. I wake up, I sleep wrong, I hurt.
Yeah, one last thing about Bonneville too is like I would really like to see more guys my age out there because I'm not that young anymore. I'm 47, but most of the guys out of Bonneville are in their 70s and 80s now, and it's not going to go away anytime soon, I don't think. But there needs to be more younger guys that decide, hey, I can do this. It seems so unobtainable if you from the outside looking in, but if you go out there, start talking to people, you can do it. You can go race out there. You don't have to start with a 200-mile-an-hour record car. You can start with whatever you have. Just
my brother-in-law, they're motorcycle people in his family.
Yeah.
So years ago, we were still living in Illinois. They did the research and it was like, oh, it was some small CC engine class. They're like, man, nobody's even tried to set a record in this thing in 20 years. Yeah. So they built this, I want to say it was a Norton or something maybe. But they went out there and they set a record at like 83 or 87 mile an hour. But they set a record their first time out. Everything went well. They stayed up. The salt was good. This was probably almost 20 years ago now. Yeah. And they went out there. Brother-in-law went with. Was like, man, that was a really cool experience. They haven't been back since because nobody has tried to break their record. They're like, we're not going to go 200 or whatever and try to get in the club. We're sensible about that.
Right.
And we don't want to go that fast. So like if somebody ever goes and they learned enough, they're like, if somebody bumps it up to 90 mile an hour, we'll go back the next year. And so they always pay attention if somebody bumps their record. Right now, they're still the record holder for like 20 years because nobody's ever built a motorcycle again to try to bump their record up. So
it just goes to show that people are put together different. For me, I was hooked the first time I went out there. I mean, they sucked the hook into me, and I tried to go back as many times as I could since then. So, and some people, they go out, experience it, check that off, and they don't need to go back. But people like me,
their family does dirt track racing.
Yeah, so they've got something to scratch that itch already.
Yeah. And that was just like, well, we're doing this and we perform, so let's try Bonneville. And
yeah. And for me, I can't drag race every weekend, and I wanted to run nitro, and there's really no other alternative that I can think of besides drag racing or land speed racing if you want to run nitro, and especially in a Model A. Putting nitro on a Model A, that just doesn't happen unless you're at Bonneville.
No. Yeah,
so,
right.
That's kind of what led me to race there. That, and it's just a cool place. And the people are so cool.
Yeah, super cool. If you've never been, I tell people like the hot rod guy, he went out with Alan Johnson this year for the first time. And I was like, dude, I know you're going to get up early, and but if you're not on the crew, you may not. I says, you got to get up there and watch the sun come up at least one time. And it'll just, I'm not a that like spiritual, but it's spiritual, man. It's like
It really is.
you're on the moon or something. It's like, man, just sitting out there before the cars are running, and how quiet it is, and yeah, seeing the sun come up at Bonneville it's just life changing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and for me, the thing that really sunk me is like hearing a blown fuel car start up out there. There's nothing. It's not like drag racing where there's sound or reverberate off all these things around you. For there, it's like it takes up the whole place when a blown fuel car runs. It's just a different sound. It doesn't sound like anything else. It's there's a deep tone, and it fills up that entire salt flats. And you think about just an engine that's only this big, it fills up this entire miles and miles of area with that one engine sound. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So, there's anything else you got for him? We talked a little bit about everything, and we talked an hour about Bonneville. I knew we wanted to get to the hot rod stuff before, because I knew that the twinkle come into his eye when we started talking about Bonneville. Yeah. And Poteet was the same way when you talked Bonneville with Poteet. He loved to talk about Bonneville. Man.
I never considered myself being just like a Bonneville guy, but I guess I am now.
You got that red hat on. You're a Bonneville guy. Yeah.
And it's funny, I just went to the gathering at the Rock in Oklahoma, which is a great show, and I wore my hat. And I could not believe how many people I had to talk to about it. Like everyone wants to talk to you about, your experience, and it commands a lot of respect, which, I guess it should, but it surprised me how much respect it did command.
Yeah, especially in that circle, those 99% of those people at that show, they get it. That's a hardcore hot rod event.
Yeah, because when I wear it to the kids' school, they say, "What's this guy? What's with the hat? He's always wearing the same hat."
Yeah. So have you got like Chris Rasky when he got his hat? He was always posting stuff on Facebook, and I'm doing it in my red hat, and I'm doing it in my red hat. Yeah. So are you going to get a tattoo with the 200-mile-an-hour club on it? Like I don't know. When I got 2 Hall of Fame, so I've got 2 Hall of Fame tattoos. Yeah. And Eric Pratt, when he won the AMBR, he has an AMBR tattoo. Yeah. And I would definitely get a 200-mile-an-hour tattoo if I had one.
My buddy Albert, that I was talking about, he's, like I said, 82. He got a 200-mile-an-hour club tattoo on his calf, and he's very proud of that. He's like, when you come out here next time, I'll pay for it if you want to get it. So I'm considering. I haven't said no yet.
Yeah. Tim would definitely do the tattoo, and he would definitely never take the hat off.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, we want to congratulate you for getting in the 200-mile-an-hour club safely. Hopefully when you go out, there's way less fire for the next time as you go.
I only had to catch on fire twice.
Are you going to try for next fall for having the new motor in it? Will you have that ready by then?
Yeah, so my current plan, the car is built to accept that engine, so it almost bolts in, but I do have to change a few things. Like my fuel tank is going to have to be rearranged a little. I have to build a few brackets here and there, but it almost will bolt in. So my current plan is to run it at El Mirage, which I've never run at El Mirage. It's in California, Dry Lake. I plan on running there in May. It's a 2-day meet. That will give me some test and tune time with the new engine, because we're going to have to learn a new tune-up. I'll have to learn how to drive, because I probably can't drive it the same way, because we'll have about potentially 3,000 horsepower instead of 800. So I won't be able to just floor it like I did before.
Yeah, the stories I've heard, again, I've never been to El Mirage, but listening to Brick, and he says it's way hard. The times that he's raced at El Mirage, it's way harder to get traction on the dirt than it is. Of course, the salt changes so much, but
but I feel like I could learn a little bit about the tune-up, and that's my main goal, is just make sure I didn't do anything stupid. And then
how long is the El Mirage course?
It's short. I think it's 1.33 miles or something like that.
Oh, okay.
It's not nearly as long as any of the Bonneville courses. And there's only been, I think, 2 or 3 people that have gone over 300 at El Mirage. It's a very, very small group.
So to run at El Mirage, you can't. That's another thing. You have to be in a club.
Yes.
To run out there. Like Brick explained that to me. You had to get accepted into a club, meet some guys. You can't just go as a lone wolf type of guy.
Yeah, you can run as a guest if you're an SCT member, but you won't be able to set a record or anything, which I'm not going to do that the first time out anyway, because I'll be a rookie out there. And that's kind of weird, because even though I've been 200 at Bonneville and in the 200-mile-an-hour club, I'm a rookie at El Mirage and have to start over again out there. So I can only
it's the same thing when Kyle Larson, NASCAR driver, he goes to Indy because he hadn't raced a race in Indy. He's run all sprint cars and dirt. He was a rookie and won Rookie of the Year at the Indy Motor Speedway. So it's slightly different. You're still a rookie.
You got to pay your dues no matter where you're at.
Yeah. So we want to thank Mr. Brian Bass for being on the Strange Motion Way podcast, and I'm glad that we got this in. You put us off probably longer than anybody because you were working on the car, but it
Sorry
paid
about
off, and you got in the club. So we want to thank you for being on the podcast. I was really looking forward to this, and Carrie's just kind of sitting here because I don't think you guys have ever met because she's never.
Was it a shop?
Oh, you did. Oh, you went the one time, didn't you?
Yeah,
The
we
first
met.
time, didn't you? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I forgot
I
about
hope
that.
it wasn't too boring.
That's cool.
Well, she's always like, don't bother them too
I
long.
know.
Don't bother
We,
them.
we talked about Carol Shelby's Chicken Ranch. We talked about being
Right?
on fire. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's cool.
Okay.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
The Strange Motion Way podcast, brought to you by Royal Purple Synthetic Oils.
Royal Purple premium synthetic motor oils and high-performance chemicals have been designed to improve performance in all conditions and provide cleaner operation, better mileage, and decreased oil change frequency. That means less oil changes. With products available for your gasoline and diesel engines, Royal Purple is the obvious choice for your performance needs. Drive with Royal Purple, the synthetic expert.